So kept ready to catch the... Where are we going, Alexander?
A multi-million-dollar new tourist attraction based on the movie industry is being built on the Gold Coast.
Warner Brothers Movie World is a theme park operating on the Gold Coast in the Australian state of Queensland. Opened in 1991 by Village Roadshow, an Australian-based entertainment conglomerate in partnership with Warner Brothers Entertainment, the park was an attempt to capitalise on three emerging market trends. First, the fledgling Australian film industry, which had entered a period of renewed international attention on the backs of films like Crocodile Dundee and Crocodile Dundee 2. Second, the flourishing tourism industry on the Gold Coast, which, with its picturesque sun and surf, had been established as a premier tourist attraction for both domestic and international tourists. And third, a desire to make use of the vast library of Warner Brothers intellectual properties, which included the world of DC superheroes and their films, the Looney Tunes, and a litany of cinematic classics like Casablanca and Bachelor Mother. Maybe not the second one. Thus, Village Roadshow drew direct inspiration from two American theme parks, Universal Studios Hollywood in California and Disney MGM Studios in Florida, both of which combined functional filmmaking facilities with rides and attractions, catering not only to fans of the intellectual properties owned by the park's respective parent companies, but to those interested in both the real world of filmmaking and the mythologized history of Hollywood's golden age. Movie World's slogan, Hollywood on the Gold Coast, reflects a similar focus, though there would be a key difference. Whereas Universal and Disney owned their respective theme parks, Warner Brothers did not own Warner Brothers Movie World. Village Roadshow merely entered into an agreement with Warner Brothers which would grant them exclusive use of their famous IPs. While this meant that attractions at the park could not be dramatically altered at the behest of a studio head across the ocean, it also meant that the park would not have unlimited access to those sweet Bugs Bunny bucks. In any case, Village's partnership with one of the biggest media conglomerates in the world would differentiate Movie World from the two other major theme parks already operating on the Gold Coast. The first of these was SeaWorld Nara, which had been operating in some form or another since 1958, and mostly emphasised encounters with sad marine life, though it did also offer a few world-class thrill rides. The second was Dreamworld, which was deliberately based on Disneyland and Walt Disney World, but at the time was also without any license to utilise any famous IPs within the park. Who would you rather meet during your trip to Queensland, kids? Bugs Bunny or original Dreamworld mascot Kenny Koala? Movie World's design was helmed by veteran American park developer Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood Jr., which is exactly the kind of phantasmagorical name you would hope for the man designing your theme park, with construction taking approximately 16 months. Considering the significant capital invested and its association with one of the world's biggest media companies, it's no surprise that when the park finally opened on the 2nd of June 1991, it was to considerable media fanfare. The park's opening ceremony featured guests of honour Kurt Russell, Goldie Hawn, Clint Eastwood and Mel Gibson, an entirely none too shabby guest list of celebrities that were certain to remain unproblematic media favourites well into the future. The park's layout was fairly simple. Rather than being segmented into different distinct zones like a Disney park, most of the attractions were housed in or off the park's main street, down which the guests would stroll after passing the Fountain of Fame beyond the entry gates. Main Street had a 1930s to 1950s architectural aesthetic reminiscent of the golden age of Hollywood, allowing the park to incorporate franchises as diverse as Bonnie and Clyde, Casablanca, and Superman without any of them appearing incongruous. However, there were two distinct and self-contained park precincts branching off from Main Street. The Wild West precinct, an immersive homage to the Western genre of film, and Looney Tunes Land, a mostly child-orientated zone, even though children couldn't possibly appreciate the subtlety and complexity of the Looney Tunes.
Got the drop on you with my disintegrating pistol. And brother, when it disintegrates, it disintegrates.
If the guests of honour had hung around after the opening ceremony, they would have had a number of opening day attractions to enjoy. In absolutely no order, they were as follows. Police Academy Stunt Show. Police Academy Stunt Show was a live stunt show that combined the slapstick humour of the Police Academy films with some very legitimate stunt work and some degree of audience participation. The show's story revolved around bumbling police recruits trying to apprehend an escaped criminal duo and featured car chases, shootouts, high falls, and, at the conclusion, one very large explosion. Police Academy Stunt Show was featured very prominently in the park's early marketing, presented as a means to give the audience a real taste of the movie magic that underpinned the park's conception. With its combination of silly humour and excitement, it would remain a family favourite at the park for decades to come. The Young Einstein Gravity Homestead. Remember the 1988 Australian comedy Young Einstein from Yahoo Serious? Well, pretend that you do, because this walkthrough attraction was based on it. Located near the Wild West Zone, the Gravity Homestead was essentially a large log cabin with a cleverly designed interior that caused guests to encounter visual illusions that some might find interesting. Look, they're not all going to be winners, but at least this was an attraction based on an Australian film. And if nothing else, Gravity Homestead answered the question on everybody's lips. Will there ever be a theme park attraction based on the 1988 Australian comedy Young Einstein from Yahoo Serious?
I know those words, but that sign makes no sense.
Movie Magic Special Effects Show. Drawing considerable inspiration from Universal Studios attractions such as Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies, this guided tour took guests through a series of sound stages demonstrating how filmmakers achieved various visual and audio effects in films, with volunteers from the audience. The first segment would demonstrate chroma key technology by having a volunteer dress up as Superman and creating the illusion of flight. The second segment would have guests creating sound effects that would be then inserted into clips of Lethal Weapon, and in the final portion, one lucky volunteer got to step into the cockpit of the titular bomber from the 1990 World War II drama The Memphis Belle, which would have been an absolute thrill for the half dozen people who had actually seen that film. There was also a dedicated studio backlot tour of Village's genuine filmmaking facilities with authentic props from WB Films, though the extent to which this intersected with the Movie Magic Special Effects Show is unclear. Regardless, the attraction represented a dedicated focus on informing guests about the magic behind the camera, a combination of education and entertainment I like to call entertainment. Looney Tunes Studio Tour. Later renamed the Looney Tunes River Ride, this dark river ride was themed around the filming of the latest Looney Tunes film in Hollywood, and was the premier attraction within the park's Looney Tunes Village precinct. It would feature a cast member leading guests onto the set of the film where, after interacting with talking animatronics of the tunes themselves, they would learn that Bugs Bunny is missing, having abandoned the set and burrowed his way to Australia. The story thus follows Looney Tunes Back in Action rules, in which the Toons are characters that exist in the real world as actors within their films, and not Space Jam rules where the Toons are fictional characters within our world while also secretly living in a parallel world underneath a golf course. Boarding an Earth drill, guests would be taken down to Australia to try to help track down Bugs, where they would board riverboats and travel through a series of scenes depicting the Toons in various outback settings. Except for a sudden drop at the end, the ride is very slow moving, giving riders the opportunity to look out for the Bugs animatronic, which was visible to the guests, but not the other characters. The final scene would show them reunited and filming again, this time in a Gold Coast-inspired setting. So presumably, according to the lore of the ride, guests, when they enter through the gates of Movie World, move from Australia to Hollywood, which is where the river ride begins. The Earth drill then takes them back to Australia, which is where most of the ride takes place and where it ends. But when it ends, the guests just walk back out into the park, which has already been established as within Hollywood. Quite frankly, it's a mess. The lack of music and slow pace of the boats lends a feeling of emptiness to the whole experience. Still, the theatricality of the attraction, with its story told over multiple different stages, ensured it remained a prominent family-friendly attraction for many years to come. Warner Brothers Classics and the Great Gremlins Adventure. More commonly just known as the Gremlins Ride, this attraction began with guests sitting in a comfortable theatre to watch some bloopers from classic Warner Brothers films, before a cast member rushed in to announce that the Gremlins, the titular little beasts from the 1984 horror comedy and its 1990 sequel, had taken over the Warner Brothers film archive, and that the audience would need to evacuate immediately. Guests were then led onto vehicles that took them through the archive as animatronic gremlins cackled and caused high-octane chaos all around them. Throughout the ride, participants could also spot Gizmo, the cuddly gremlin, and Beetlejuice, who was not a gremlin and did not actually feature in the Gremlins films, but still generously decides to help the riders escape. Beetlejuice's inclusion is unexpected, but welcome. Village presented the park as a melting pot of various disparate film franchises, so why shouldn't that idea extend to the individual rides? Warner Brothers Classics and The Great Gremlins Adventure was a unique attraction that synthesized a faithful depiction of a relevant intellectual property, in this case the Gremlins, with both a heavy reverence for WB's golden age, through the opening segment featuring classic blooper reels, and the film-making process, by having the ride section take place inside the film archive. In short, an ideal attraction for Warner Brothers Movie World. Speedy Gonzales' Tijuana Taxis. A children's ride located in Looney Tunes land, these were small taxi-themed cars that traversed a single track that circled around a vaguely Mexican setting at a snail's pace. Remember Speedy Gonzales and how his defining characteristic is moving really slowly? The thing is, in Looney Tunes there is a Speedy Gonzales supporting character called Slowpoke Rodriguez, but they couldn't name the attraction after him because nobody would know who it's referring to. Also, the 4-year-olds riding the taxis really couldn't care less because they're 4. Looney Tunes Musical Review. A live musical show featuring the Looney Tunes dancing and lip-syncing to renditions of 70s pop classics. Between the songs, everyone refers to Bugs Bunny as Hollywood Bugs. This was far too early to be a reference to wrestling superstar Hulk Hogan turning heel and rechristening himself Hollywood Hogan, so it's more likely due to the pretense that the characters are getting together to make a movie. Even though none of the songs they're singing are about making movies, they're just songs. Maybe this was meant to tie into the film being shot at the beginning of the Looney Tunes River ride, but it just seems that the writers were concerned that the audience would forget they're in a place called Movie World. There's also a lot of that post-1980s introduce yourself rapping that does get quite wordy, which is unnecessary when your target audience can't understand what you're saying. The Looney Tunes Musical Review was definitely one for the kids. Or adults who enjoyed things that were bad. Western Action Show. An outdoor stunt show similar in tone to the Police Academy stunt show, but focusing on the stunts typically displayed in Western films. There are 2 versions of this show, one in a dedicated auditorium, much like Police Academy, and then later, quite impressively, atop the facades of the fake Western town, giving the audience a very close look at the action. Both feature lots of gunfighting, horse riding, whip cracking, and very generous interpretations of the American accent by Australian stuntmen.
What the f*** are you talking about? Was that even English?
While very competently composed and performed, the show would never have the same resonance as its Police Academy counterpart and wouldn't last at the park half as long. Along Main Street was the park's 4D cinema, Roxy Theatre, playing from 1991 to 1997, Adventure in the Fourth Dimension. Unlike later short films played at the park, which were typically truncated versions of popular animated films, Adventure in the Fourth Dimension was made exclusively for Movie World. No footage exists online, but according to a post on the Facebook page Warner Brothers Movie World Throwbacks to the Movie World, the story followed 2 siblings who break away from a Movie World tour and find a machine that transports them into scenes from classic Warner Brothers films, including the Hitchcock thriller Dial M for Murder. Needless to say, a far cry from the later likes of Ice Age, Dawn of the Dinosaurs, the 4D experience. This testimony is all the information we have regarding this very obscure piece of lost media. Further up Main Street, at the special effects studio, guests could dance in front of a blue screen and star in their own music videos, just like your favourite chart-topping artists from 1991. If that little taste of stardom had made you hungry, there were a number of snack bars and concession stands to stop by, but if you were feeling a bit more fancy, you could drop into Rick's Café American, based on the primary setting of the 1940 classic Casablanca, where you too could ponder the moral efficacy of neutrality in times of crisis while you waited for a hamburger. Afterwards, you could wet your whistle at the Dirty Harry Bar, which answers the question, what would happen if the gritty Inspector Harry Callahan retired from shooting criminals in the head and chest and opened a bar in a theme park next to the Gremlins ride? The first beer was poured, of course, by Dirty Harry himself, Mr. Clint Eastwood, on opening day.
Go ahead. Make my beer.
This is to say nothing of the various photo opportunities available with all the characters walking around the park, some of whom were associated with particular rides, some of whom were part of daily shows and skits on Main Street, and some who were just iconic enough to warrant an appearance. These included the Looney Tunes, a very crappy looking version of DC's Justice League, Cowboys and Indians, can't do that anymore, Gizmo, Beetlejuice, Bonnie and Clyde, who would periodically rob the Main Street Bank, Marilyn Monroe, and Charlie Chaplin's Little Tramp. Those keen to commemorate their holiday had plenty of opportunities to purchase some branded merchandise, and Movie World offered a variety of places to pick up souvenirs, including the Warner Brothers department store, which was stocked with your typical shirts, socks, and stuffies, and the Warner Bros. Gallery, offering a more upmarket range of classic cinema memorabilia. With such a publicized opening, the only question was whether or not Warner Brothers Movie World could match the hype. The answer was a resounding
Yes.
Offering high-quality entertainment not found elsewhere in Australia, the park was a financial success from the outset and quickly became a must-visit destination in both the domestic and the emerging Asian tourist markets, receiving 1.2 million guests in its opening year. It was, to borrow a cliché, fun for the whole family. While the number of attractions would balloon over the coming years, almost every attraction at the park on opening day could be enjoyed by all ages, meaning families attending were all but guaranteed a full day of experiences that could not be had at rival Dreamworld or SeaWorld. In late 1996, the time of my family's first trip to the Gold Coast, I was 3 years old, middle child wedged between brothers aged 1 and 5. I definitely don't envy my parents having to wrangle 3 young children across state lines, but I'm sure they remain vindicated in their understanding that one of them might well analyze the trip in a video form more than 2 decades later. Not that I knew it at the time, I was 3, but I had arrived at Movie World after a period of significant expansion, with some very expensive new attractions having been added in the preceding 5 years. The first addressed a severe deficit at the park: lack of Batman. In a post-Avengers world, it's easy to overlook just what a phenomenon Tim Burton's 1989 Batman was and how much money it made for Warner Brothers. At time of release, it was the 5th highest grossing film, not of 1989, of all time, and Village were leaving money on the table by not utilizing the Caped Crusader more at the park.
Now, the all-time blockbuster movie comes alive. Prepare yourselves for the biggest, most explosive, heart-pounding thrill ride in the universe. Batman Adventure, the ride, now open at Warner Brothers Movie World, Hollywood on the Gold Coast.
Batman Adventure The Ride opened in December 1992 and was based primarily on Batman Returns, the Burton-directed sequel released earlier that year. Coincidentally, Burton's films featured an Art Deco-inspired set design that was happily congruous with the rest of Movie World's Main Street. The ride was a motion simulator, a kind of attraction most famously featured in the 1997 Mr. Bean movie. The experience began with guests on a tour of the Wayne Manor Library before an alarm forces them through a secret passageway and into the Batcave, where they are greeted by an animatronic Batman. Wow, Bruce Wayne is going to be shocked when it turns out Batman has been living underneath his house this whole time. The stilted gestures of the animatronic Batman became a recurring joke for my parents for some years, but truthfully, looks pretty good. Via video, Commissioner Gordon would inform Batman that the Red Triangle Circus Gang, the collection of violent miscreants led by Danny DeVito in Batman Returns, had escaped and were wreaking havoc in Gotham. The guests would then be led into their seats in front of a screen that would simulate them helping Batman defeat the gang. The movie displayed during the ride is mostly live action, meaning it retains its quality even years later, rather than just computer-generated graphics that have a tendency to look out of date within 5 years. This appears as a natural extension of Burton's big-budget blockbuster, though with decidedly less BDSM Catwoman. Cowards. Combined with the pre-ride segment, which has guests moving from Wayne Manor into the Batcave, this provides a complete story for guests to be a part of. Less a ride than a fully immersive experience. And a successful one at that. The attraction is credited with setting a then park attendance record of 12,000 attendees on the 30th of December, 1992. In 1995, Western action show rode into the sunset. It was replaced with Maverick Grand Illusion Show, an attraction based on the previous year's Maverick film, which starred Mel Gibson and was itself based on a 1950s-1960s television series of the same name. However, some variation of the action show survived for an indeterminate length of time outside of the Wild West Zone's dedicated auditorium and atop the town's facades. While tonally similar to its predecessor, the desire to move from a show focused on stunts to one focused on illusions and magic may have been to differentiate itself from the Police Academy stunt show. I mean, if you've only got one day at the park, are you going to line up for two separate live-action stunt shows? Regardless, it was a well-produced and adequate complement to the park's Wild West Zone. Actually, the total number of attractions based on Mel Gibson films added to Movie World in 1995 was 2. Which isn't many, but it's more than you'd expect.
Get ready. Hold tight. Brace yourself for the thrill of your life. Only at Warner Brothers Movie World can you ride Lethal Weapon, the most heart-thumping, suspended, inverted, outside looping coaster in the entire world. It'll blow you away. Ride Lethal Weapon, opening December 17th, only at Warner Brothers Movie World.
Perhaps the biggest change at the park up to this point was the inclusion of Lethal Weapon The Ride. The suspended looping coaster would be the park's first coaster overall. The Lethal Weapon franchise by this time had extended to 3 films, the latest of which had come out in 1992, and none of which had featured a roller coaster, not even in the deleted scenes. In retrospect, it may seem like an odd choice of franchise upon which to base the next enormous attraction at your family theme park. However, this may very much have been the point. Just like the films, Lethal Weapon The Ride was not for the whole family. It was a high-octane coaster with a stellar reputation for delivering thrills and a less than stellar reputation for battering riders' heads against the sides of the headrest during the frequent twists. Unlike with dark rides like Batman Adventure and Gremlins Adventure, it's considerably more difficult to provide a story for a roller coaster, and Lethal Weapon doesn't have one. However, designers did ensure that the riders would be lining up in a setting meticulously themed after LA's Chinatown district, which coincidentally predates the Chinatown setting of the franchise's 4th film. In Lethal Weapon The Ride, Movie World had its first certifiable thrill ride, and it would feature heavily in their advertising of the period. It was a valuable addition. Those guests too cool to be wooed by Batman or Yosemite Sam, perished the thought, but not old enough to be visiting with children of their own, now had an experience they could look forward to just as much. The continuation of the Batman film franchise ensured an expanded roster of characters on display. By 1996, Batman, Robin, Catwoman, the Penguin, and the Riddler were all incorporated into regular parades and the stage confrontations on Main Street. And there was a period after the release of Batman Returns when the Penguin's demented circus train would roll through Main Street and kidnap willing children, just like in the movie. It was a strange movie. Similarly, after the release of Batman Forever, the Riddler's lair would be incorporated into the Movie Magic Studio Tour, in case you were interested in watching musical numbers performed by skinny men in green jumpsuits. Why would you not be? But how much of this do I remember from my first family trip? Not much. Again, I was 3. The surviving family footage shows us watching the Police Academy stunt show and meeting some of the walk-around characters. We both got a souvenir. My brother opted for a Tweety Bird themed drink bottle, literally because it was the first thing he fixated upon before we had even walked through the gates, while I made the more sensible choice of a large Batman figurine. One of the memories I have on that day is posing next to the Batmobile and being excited to show Batman and Robin the toy, as if to say, hey look, it's you. We didn't keep either of these growing up, but I've since found both in op shops and have repurchased them. Moral of the story, don't ever throw anything away because you might need to feature it in a YouTube video 2 decades later. Movie World on the Gold Coast would be the first international theme park incorporating Warner Brothers intellectual properties, but it would not be the last. Following the success of the Australian park, WB took the opportunity to purchase an existing theme park in Germany in 1994, with the intention of turning it into another Warner Bros. Movie World in Germany. They would name this new park Warner Bros. Movie World Germany, which would open in 1996 following a ceremony attended by celebrities such as Michael Douglas, Sophia Loren, George Clooney, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Gotta say, I think they had the better guest list. The designers included many rides similar to those already on the Gold Coast, though with degrees of difference. The Looney Tunes River Ride was renamed Looney Tunes Adventure. In this version, Bugs Bunny abandons the film set to try and film at an authentic castle in Germany, so the Australian-specific references, like Bugs being attacked by a crocodile or holding koalas, are replaced with scenes set in Germany's Black Forest. The story is superior in the German version. While the Australian ride just presents a series of unconnected vignettes, all the scenes here are built around references to a terrifying fire-breathing dragon living within the castle. This imbues the ride with a slow-burning tension that eventually culminates with the appearance of the dragon itself near the end of the ride. But wait, you say, there wasn't a dragon in Looney Tunes, but there was, in Friz Freeling's Oscar-winning Nighty Night Bugs, and the dragon here looks kind of like that dragon. The tension adds an element of excitement that is sorely lacking in the Gold Coast original. Movie World Germany also included a Lethal Weapon ride, though this one was a dueling coaster, that is, a coaster with two separate tracks running simultaneously. This ride was renamed Lethal Weapon Pursuit and was presumably meant to refer to the car chases of the titular franchise. Not much of a story, but it's still more than what was on offer in the Australian version of the ride, which featured a single track only. Perhaps the most notable differences could be seen between both parks' versions of Warner Bros. Classics and Great Gremlin Adventure, simply renamed Gremlins Invasion in Germany. See, rather than Beetlejuice coming to the rescue of the riders, it's Alf that saves the day. Remember Alf? He's back, in German theme park form. At the end of the blooper reel which precedes the main segment of the attraction, there is a specially shot clip depicting the famed alien life form being attacked by the gremlins in his kitchen, which leads into the gremlins attacking the guests. In the Australian version, the gremlins simply destroy the film reel before guests are ushered into the vehicles. I can only assume the change was due to Alf being more popular in Germany than in Australia. I've personally never seen a single episode of the show, but then I never saw Beetlejuice until a few years ago, so what do I know? Nothing. I know absolutely nothing. Warner Bros. Movie World was purchased by a different soulless conglomerate in 2005, ain't that just the way it goes, resulting in the retheming of all attractions away from Warner Bros. IPs. But fear not, the studio would subsequently open additional theme parks in Madrid in 2002 and Abu Dhabi in 2018. But I'm not going to talk about them. The family would return to the Coast of Gold in 2003 at a time in which international tourism was being affected by the ongoing War on Terror, I wonder how that turned out, and the SARS epidemic. Oh wow, an epidemic which killed literally hundreds of people. Oh my god, that must have been so scary to live through. If this had slowed development at the park, it's not evident. In fact, looking at the lineup of attractions in 2003, it's genuinely impressive just how many pop culture juggernauts were being represented at the park at one time. One juggernaut that had already come and gone by that time, however, was Pokemon Island of Adventure, an interactive walkthrough attraction that ran only from December 2000 to January 2001. What little information there is regarding this attraction was documented by YouTuber MewIsMe700, who catalogues lost Pokemon media. It would be remiss to simply regurgitate all the information that they found, but in short, the attraction, designed by visual effects artist James Colmer, to whom we have to thank for the only existing images of the attraction, would have guests walk through an indoor area themed to look like varying geographic environments. There would be a scale Pokemon statuette hidden in each room, which patrons could check off from the list they were provided with before entering the area, just like the game Pokemon Snap, though without a camera, which, come to think of it, was the central tenet of Pokemon Snap. The attraction ended in a Pokemon lab similar to those featured in the games and anime, with an actor playing the kindly Professor Oak. It was something very basic, clearly whipped up in a short amount of time to capitalize on the impending release of Pokemon the first movie, which Warner Bros. Was distributing. Considering the continued success of the Pokemon franchise, it is remarkable that this early theme park integration was dropped after such a short amount of time, though it's entirely possible it was an issue with the rights. The Pokemon presence at the park was extended to a specialty shop that sold merchandise and the presence of an enormous walk-around Pikachu. Gone, but not forgotten. This is in comparison to the live show Superstars Live in Concert, which was, by 2003, both gone and forgotten. Parks.com, a valuable source of information pertaining to forgotten theme park attractions, provides the following description. This musical review featured impersonators of Madonna, Marilyn Monroe, Tina Turner, Queen, Tom Jones, Elton John, and others. Whereas a Pokemon attraction at the park is very much ahead of the curve at this time, a celebrity musical review strikes me as very much yesterday's entertainment. Who is this attraction for? Regardless of how talented the impersonators undoubtedly were, which family is going to spend their very limited time at the park seeing this show? A weird family, that's for sure. Son, would you like to meet Batman? No, father, I want to watch the Tom Jones impersonator man. No, thank you. It's likely that Superstars was a short-lived replacement for the Maverick Grand Illusion show. Maverick retired in 2001, depriving the Wild West zone of one of its few draws, though by that time it was surplus to requirements. You see, a few years earlier, 1998 had seen the construction of the most expensive Australian theme park attraction to date. The Wild Wild West.
It's big. Yep. We gotta go through it. You a man or a mouse?
New at Warner Brothers Movie World on the Gold Coast. The Wild Wild West Adventure Ride.
The $18 million flume ride was originally going to be entitled the Rio Bravo after the 1959 John Wayne film of the same name, but was renamed before opening to capitalize on the upcoming Will Smith film Wild Wild West, which was sure to be a thunderous critical and commercial success.
There it is, you guys. The best roller coaster in all of Quahog.
You know, I think they kind of figured that movie was going to turn out to be bigger than it was.
The ride would be renamed again in 2001 to Wild West Falls Adventure Ride after a licensing dispute. Oh no, why would anybody want to go on this multi-million-dollar thrill ride if we don't name it after a movie nobody saw? It's irrelevant in any case. The ride's theming is just generically Western, with no references to either Rio Bravo or Wild Wild West. After queuing in a large barn, during which television screens play trailers advertising the DVD and VHS release of Warner Bros.' extensive Western movie library, riders board an 8-seat boat which travels along a flume through a gold mine, a Native American village, and a cowboy ghost town, all of which are brought to life with audio and visual effects. This builds up to the final drop from the top of the titular falls, leaving all riders soaked and satisfied. Tension and immersion is key. It's not just the thrill of the final drop, but the manner in which all aspects of the ride experience help to immerse the rider leading up to it. The ride understandably became a huge draw for all attending the park, though I personally remember finding that tension building up to the drop simply too much for my tiny little heart. I got more enjoyment out of looking around the Wild West precinct and poring over the humorous tombstones spread out in Boot Hill Graveyard. A few of these tombstones would feature very basic effects, including noises coming from, brace yourself, within the graves. Boot Hill Graveyard wasn't even an advertised attraction, it was just a part of the precinct that helped you feel like you really had stepped into another world. On the other side of the park, Looney Tunes Land had been renamed Looney Tunes Village in 1997, which presumably meant the gang had to update all their letterheads and stationery, and was revamped with a series of new family-friendly attractions. Along with the existing Speedy Gonzales Tijuana Taxi and the famed Looney Tunes Studio Tour, now renamed to the more accurate Looney Tunes River Ride, the precinct added, in 1997, Marvin the Martian Rocket Ride, a rocket-themed crazy bus-style attraction that elevates young riders up and down at a gentle pace. Sylvester and Tweety Carousel, later renamed Sylvester and Tweety Cages, in which riders enter large bird cages in pairs and spin and elevate gently around a central statue of Tweety Bird. The outdoor area is themed to look like a big living room. Very nice. Taz Hollywood cars. Essentially just slow bumper cars, so less bumper cars and more gentle grazing cars. Presumably the premise is that the ride takes place in a garage in which Taz is the mechanic, and the exterior and interior have a nice Looney look to them, though the cars themselves are definitely more reminiscent of that taxi from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Yosemite Sam's Railroad. A nice slow choo-choo around a western-themed outdoor area. This included a well-crafted Mount Rushmore-esque rock face featuring Bugs, Daffy, and Sam himself. Now, if we had to transpose the real-life inspirations into this parody, it means Daffy wrote one of the founding documents of American democracy, and Sam fought as a volunteer in the Cuban War of Independence. Doesn't really make sense to only have 3 faces if it's a Mount Rushmore parody. They should add Porky Pig as Lincoln. A few years later, they would add even more attractions to Looney Tunes Village, including Looney Tunes Splash Zone, which was a pretty basic water play area featuring water spouting up from the ground and from an upstanding water tower. Should they have based the water tower instead on the iconic one from the famed Warner Brothers backlot? Yes, they should have. But is it a forgivable mistake? No, it isn't. But this was definitely a wise investment for a theme park that hit its peak during the Australian summer, even if it meant parents now had to bring along bathers and a towel, or else buy one of them from the gift shops for $600,000. However, the biggest addition to Looney Tunes Village yet would be the Roadrunner roller coaster.
From the people who brought you the Wild, Wild West and Batman comes a new on-the-run adventure. Starring the Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote, and you on a Roadrunner roller coaster ride to remember. Catch it this summer, only at Warner Brothers Movie World.
It was a fairly basic coaster in design that reached none of the heights or speeds of a ride targeting an older demographic, but still offered younger riders a mild thrill. With its desert setting and dynamite aplenty, it effectively places the riders inside a classic Roadrunner Wile E. Coyote short, but crucially, without the risk of being crushed by a 10-ton anvil. All of these additions meant that Looney Tunes Musical Review had to be turfed out of their residency in Looney Tunes Village and moved next to the Batman ride in 2000. Which is a jarring contrast, but ultimately a better option than, say, outside the Lethal Weapon Chinatown set. Between 1996 and 2003, the attractions present at Looney Tunes Village went from just 2 to 8, effectively turning the area from a cute afterthought to a veritable mini-park in of itself. If you only had young children, you can now spend most of the day just in this precinct. Lucky you. Batman Adventure the Ride had been updated in 2001 to, brace yourself, Batman Adventure the Ride 2.
Where do they get these crazy names?
While the first Batman motion simulator incorporated live-action footage and was presented as a kind of mini-sequel to Burton's Batman Returns, this one was CGI and seemed to draw more from the designs of Batman the Animated Series, which, yes, was itself inspired by the visuals of the Burton films. Don't stress about it too much, we're all going to die eventually. The sequel ride was an unfortunate downgrade. Regardless of how many hours go into crafting smooth computer-generated images, probably a lot, it doesn't offer the same level of authenticity as real people on a screen. Batman Adventure the Ride 2 was undeniably still capable of delivering excitement, and I certainly enjoyed it when I was 10, but it didn't make you feel like you were stepping into a blockbuster film. Based on the story of the ride, it's possible that this simulator actually had 2 parallel ride experiences. In the story, one set of riders follows Batman and the other Batgirl, as they both try to stop the Joker, Mr. Freeze, and Catwoman from freezing Gotham City with a giant ice cannon. I wonder which of the villains came up with that particular master plan. Of course, Batman was also present throughout the park, meeting young Justice aficionados and participating in choreographed fight scenes on Main Street throughout the day. 2001 saw the closure of Warner Brothers Classic and the Great Gremlin Adventure, one of the park's much-loved opening day attractions. In its place, the Scooby-Doo Spooky Coaster, and what a replacement it was. This ride was a big deal.
Warner Brothers Movie World presents the craziest, spine-tingling journey ever created. The new Scooby-Doo Spooky Coaster. Be afraid. Be kind of afraid.
from the studio who brought you Lethal Weapon, Wild Wild West, and Batman.
Dad, that was the best day of my life.
Me too. Only at Warner Brothers Movie World.
Opening in 2002, the ride was based on the live-action Scooby-Doo film that was released in the same year, and which had been filmed at Village Roadshow Studios, the studios next to Movie World. Talk about your stars aligning. A state-of-the-art ride based on a financially successful film that was based on one of Warner Brothers' most marketable franchises and filmed right next door. In fact, Neil Fanning, the voice of Scooby in that film, got his start in the industry by performing in and then managing the Police Academy stunt show. Now, this was no half-hearted ride integration like Wild West Falls. Not just some fun roller coaster with a picture of a dog and his drug addict friend slapped on. No, this indoor Wild Mouse-style coaster was designed to very closely mimic the experiences of the characters in the film, even including some of the original props. Considering that the film itself features a haunted house with trains identical to those on the ride, it's hard to believe that the attraction and the film weren't developed, at least somewhat, in tandem. The ride would have patrons line up in a loading area resembling the Spooky Island castle from the film, during which behind-the-scenes interviews and making-of footage is played on the television displays. My dad scoffed at Sarah Michelle Gellar's explanation of the depth of Daphne's character. Oh, she's gonna tell us how brave and inspirational her cartoon character is she? Yeah, Dad, take Sarah Michelle Gellar down a peg. The first segment of the ride is set up as a traditional, if high-quality, ghost train, recreating the scene in which the four-person trains are attacked by swinging axes and animatronic monsters. Following this, the cars are elevated straight up, drop backwards unexpectedly, and are sent spinning through the Wild Mouse section of the ride, while lasers shine, dry ice billows, and the MXPX cover of the Scooby-Doo theme song plays loudly. After a final drop, the guests exit through the gift shop where they can buy a snapshot of their faces when they thought for a split second a giant axe would kill them. In terms of demographics, the attraction struck a great balance. It was certainly fast and exciting enough to thrill you, but the theming was enough to entice younger patrons to give it a try. At 10 years old, for example, there was no way I was going to ride the Lethal Weapon, but I rode the Spooky Coaster and I loved it. Everybody loved it. The ride is a core memory of so many childhoods. Ask anybody in their 20s for their fondest movie world memories and the first thing they will say will almost always be Scooby-Doo Spooky Coaster. The park had struck gold again. The Young Einstein Gravity Homestead closed in 2001, which would have been a massive disappointment to, well, somebody out there, presumably, being replaced with a tribute to another quaint little film project. Harry Potter Movie Magic Experience was a walkthrough attraction based on the first two films about the magical glasses boy and featured a recreation of the Hogwarts Express and later that flying car what got them wizard lads up to mischief. It was replaced in 2003 with an exhibit based on a different cultural phenomena with the official Matrix exhibit. In hindsight, it's crazy that they replaced a Harry Potter attraction after only 2 films in what would become an 8-film series. An 11-film series if you include those Fantastic Beasts movies. 8-film series. Perhaps it was another licensing issue, or perhaps at the time Harry Potter just seemed like a flash in the pan and there was no indication that millennials everywhere watching those movies as children would go on to base their entire personalities on them.
I have a bunch of different Harry Potter wines, so I'm going to sort them and see if they are Ravenclawsome or if they Leviosac. Bon appetit. Wow, this one is my spirit animal. Patron, yes.
Not good. As opposed to the Harry Potter Movie Magic Experience, which had a greater emphasis on immersion into the fictional world of the intellectual property, the official Matrix exhibit focused more heavily on the behind-the-scenes aspect of the franchise, showcasing props, sets, and a look at the groundbreaking effects, albeit all presented with a movie-accurate digitech aesthetic. At the time of visiting, I thought The Matrix was awesome, and we even got to watch the second one on pay-per-view in our hotel room. I didn't understand what it was about. I still don't, but it was sure cool when Morpheus had that sword on the truck. That's what I wanted to see at the exhibit. Dudes punching other dudes, not multimedia displays about how the bullet time effect worked. There was, however, a prop payphone that you could use to hear lines from the movie, so can't fault that. Meanwhile, on Main Street, the park-specific adventure in the Fourth Dimension was replaced in 1997 with the much more marketable Marvin the Martian in the Third Dimension, a 12-minute 3D short featuring Daffy and Marvin causing their typical hijinks in outer space. According to Wikipedia, it was the first CG film to be created for viewing with 3D glasses and would be showcased extensively at other Warner Bros. Licensed parks in the US and Germany over the next decade. And yes, this one actually did get a Blu-ray release in 2012. In terms of walk-around characters, the Spooky Coaster brought the arrival of the Scooby Gang and some of the ghosts from the film. They were joined by none other than international man of mystery and world-renowned horn dog, Austin Danger Powers. There was no Austin Powers attraction at the park. It's not obvious what such a hypothetical attraction could possibly look like, but the third film had come out in 2002 and was definitely too much a part of the zeitgeist to ignore. Oh, behave. Am I making you aroused, baby? Things of that sort. The actor they got to portray Austin was fantastic, though he wisely downplayed the rampant sexuality, which you'll recall was quite a large part of the character, so Movie World Austin was just a guy that liked to throw up the peace sign and could dance quite well. So what can be made of the evolution undergone by Movie World by 2003, a little over a decade since the park first opened? The park's motto and mission statement was Hollywood on the Gold Coast, and this vision had been fulfilled through attractions that met at least one of the following two criteria. Criteria 1 was for attractions to educate the public on the magic of movie making and the wider realm of the film and entertainment industry. This can be seen most prominently in attractions like Movie Magic Special Effects Show, pulling back the literal curtain on how some of the most famous effects are achieved in the industry. Criteria 2 was to immerse attendees in the fantasy worlds seen on screen through effective use of relevant intellectual properties and attractions that placed you within a story with your favourite characters. Batman Adventure the Ride is a great example of this, allowing riders to team up with Batman and battle some of his famous foes within the story of the ride. Some attractions achieved both criteria. Warner Bros. Classics and the Great Gremlin Adventure had the pretense of riders viewing bloopers from the Warner Bros. Archive before being set upon by the Gremlins, a popular intellectual property. Similarly, the Police Academy Stunt Show utilised the comedic tone and setting of the franchise as a means to showcase the stunt work you would see in any Hollywood blockbuster. Even attractions such as Looney Tunes River Ride and Looney Tunes Musical Review still carried the pretense of the characters within making a film. By 2003, it was evident that the park had begun to focus heavily on the second criteria to the detriment of the first, and that the focus on what happened behind the camera was being dropped in favour of more representation of the characters in front of it. The Great Gremlin Adventure was dropped in favour of the Scooby-Doo Spooky Coaster, and while you could certainly argue that the behind-the-camera aspect was present, insomuch as the ride featured props from the film shot right next door to the park, the main draw was that the riders could recreate an experience they saw in the film. Most of the attractions added since opening day, be it the Lethal Weapon, Wild West Falls, Batman Adventure, or the entire refurbishment of Looney Tunes Village, retained no such pretense to the wider entertainment industry outside of the specific franchises they represented. A notable exception was Official Matrix Exhibit, which focused heavily on the making of the films, and which I recall finding boring for this exact reason. Likewise, Movie Magic Special Effects was still kicking around in 2003 when I visited, but there was never any question of my family using our very limited time at the park to queue up for something like that. So using only my family as a sample audience, it's hard to argue that the park's change in focus was a bad business decision, but you will find many long-time park devotees doing just that. Also present in the park at the outset was a healthy respect for the golden age of Hollywood, the classic films that were worth paying tribute to not because they were currently making millions at the box office like Batman or Lethal Weapon were, but because of what they represented to the history of the medium. The primary restaurant at the park was themed after 1940s Casablanca, not because that was a particularly relevant film at the time, but because it was a respected film. You could also see this respect in the inclusion of characters such as Charlie Chaplin and Marilyn Monroe, veritable legends of the industry that hadn't made a film in decades, because they were dead, and in Charlie's case, blacklisted for communist sympathies. In contrast, the lineup of attractions and characters present at the park in 2003 perfectly encapsulates contemporary pop culture. In one day, you could see Scooby-Doo, Neo, Austin Powers, even Harry Potter, Train. These were some of the biggest franchises of the time, and Warner Bros. Owned them. It must have seemed like throwing money away by not incorporating them in favour of more Hollywood icons. Again, who do kids want to see? Charlie Chaplin, the indomitable little tramp who taught us how to smile? Or Scooby-doo, the dog that likes to take drugs? Alongside this change in direction was an influx of thrill rides, of which there were 0 on opening day. This would be representative of a shift towards an older demographic if it were not for the number of additions made to the child-centric Looney Tunes village. So, in just over a decade, Movie World had expanded its offerings dramatically to the benefit of every prospective guest, except the dedicated cinephile. But, was there anywhere else they could turn to for a fix of educational and entertaining movie-based attractions? Warner Brothers Movie World was not always the only movie studio/theme park operated in conjunction with a major film studio in Australia.
You're done. All set? Okay. One more thing.
Hey, how was that?
You ready? Action.
Backlot booking's essential. Call 1-300-FOX-TICKS.
Now, the YouTube channel Review Time offers a very concise and informative history of Movie World's one-time rival, but briefly, Fox Backlot Studios opened in Sydney in 1999 at the site of the former Royal Easter Show, only a short drive from the city's central business district, a prime piece of real estate in one of the world's most popular cities. Fox decreed that the location would serve as a hybrid movie studio and theme park, following the lead of Disney and Universal in the United States and, of course, Warner Brothers on the Gold Coast. The premier attraction was Titanic: The Experience, a $26 million walk-through attraction showcasing props from the 1997 blockbuster. The experience would place attendees in the shoes of passengers aboard the sinking ocean liner, with a variety of special effects based on those used in James Cameron's movie. If you ever saw the film and thought, I too would like to die because of the selfishness of the wealthy, this was the attraction for you. Additionally, alongside an original stage show based around a director trying to put together his latest blockbuster in Australia, there was a Simpsons precinct with walk-around characters and Springfield landmarks. Also, a recreation of the set from the film Babe. You remember Babe, right? Talking pig? Well, not enough other people did, and attendance at the park was way down from what Fox were anticipating, probably as a result of steep ticket prices and the limited number of attractions. Furthermore, owing to the location, park expansion was practically impossible. While Titanic: The Experience was lauded as a fantastic achievement, it opened 2 years after that film was released. How often could people be expected to keep coming back to see it without a steady stream of Titanic sequels? So after only 2 years of consistent financial disappointment, Fox decided that they would retain the studio but close the associated theme park, which must have caused them considerable embarrassment. Or did it? The terms of the original lease required Fox to keep a portion of the area open to public access for a minimum of 2 years, and some have suggested that Fox only opened the theme park to satisfy this legal precondition. They could then close the theme park to minimal public outcry after the minimum time requirement had been satisfied, leaving them with a studio right in the heart of Sydney. The studio still exists, now as Disney Studios Australia after the Disney buyout of Fox, but Movie World remains the sole studio-associated theme park in the country, which is a shame. Similar to Pokemon and Harry Potter at Movie World, the inclusion of The Simpsons at Fox Studios' backlot was a precursor to their inclusion at Universal Parks more than a decade later. Ultimately, even if the park wasn't created solely to satisfy a legal condition as many have suggested, the park's location essentially meant there was never going to be any option to expand and thrive. But that's show business. Or as we say in the industry, that's show business, baby. Moving on. In the summer of 2006, I was 13. I had my Motorola Pebble and $20 worth of prepaid credit. I listened to Green Day's American Idiot on repeat, and I didn't even care when Billy Joe Armstrong sang curse words. Yeah, I wasn't the same kid I was 3 years ago, who would have jumped at the chance to go on a Gold Coast holiday with my family again. So when my mum asked if we'd like to go to the Gold Coast again, I said, yes please. I hadn't changed that much in 3 years. Had Movie World? Lasting less than a year in 2005 was Be a High Five Star Studio. High Five was a children's music group with their own TV show that was very popular with the under sixes. This attraction allowed kids to dance and sing in front of a blue screen so that they could then be inserted into a music video which parents could then purchase on DVD, while there was also a dedicated High Five retail outlet at the park at the same time. Marvin the Martian in 3D stopped showing at the Roxy Theatre in 2005 after 8 glorious years, to be replaced with Shrek 4D Adventure. The Green Meme Machine was big money, and Shrek 2 had become the highest-grossing animated film of all time the year previous. This particular 16-minute short had actually been produced after the release of the first Shrek film, and is canonically set between Shrek 1 and 2, featuring the ghost of Lord Farquaad kidnapping Princess Fiona. Now, it's a funny film, but what's more interesting, especially considering the kinds of film that would follow at the Roxy, is that this entirely original short is set firmly within the continuity of the main series, with all original voice actors returning. There was one memorable 4D effect in which Shrek dropped spiders from the screen, which was immediately followed by a hissing insectoid sound coming from underneath the audience's seats. Everybody loved that. I guess if they didn't like spiders, they probably didn't. This would be the first of several films showing at the Roxy based on franchises produced by non-WB studios. Surely it would make more sense to showcase franchises already represented within the park? At least Shrek would appear as a walk-around character, featured in the Main Street Parade and in his own stage show, revolving around, get this, Little Red Riding Hood, Donkey, and Puss in Boots putting on a farewell concert for Shrek before he goes to live with Fiona in Far, Far Away, meaning it takes place before the events of Shrek 3. They made the Shrek stage show consistent with the film series continuity, though not that consistent. Donkey and Puss are the same height as Shrek here, because tyrannical labour laws prevent children from dancing in heavy costumes for several hours a day. 2005 also saw the closure of Movie Magic Special Effects Show, another of the opening day attractions. Whereas the goal of Movie Magic was to give park attendees a glimpse into the technical wizardry that went into making your favourite films, its replacement sought to make you go really, really, really fast. Superman Escape, an accelerator coaster opening on Boxing Day 2005, would be one of the most publicised additions in the park's history, exceeding even Lethal Weapon the Ride and Scooby-Doo Spooky Coaster. The ride's dedicated teaser campaign heavily promoted the code 01002, which turned out to be referring to the coaster's main selling point, its acceleration speed of 0 to 100 in 2 seconds, which, fair play to them, is pretty damn fast. To help build hype, the ride had its own dedicated website, featuring a message board and a section where you can download screensavers. Do you remember screensavers? The message board is very wholesome, full of children talking about how fun Superman Escape is, or how much they're looking forward to riding it in the future. These days it'd be full of crypto scammers and Holocaust deniers. Well, that's the internet in 2023 for you. You're welcome to it. The website also had a timer counting down to the release of the film Superman Returns, which came out in 2006, the first theatrically released Superman film in almost 2 decades. However, the ride itself was not a tie-in to the film. The pretense is that the riders were testing out the MRT, the Metropolis Rapid Transit Subway System, a form of transport that happens to look exactly like a roller coaster train, fancy that. Shortly after boarding the trains, an earthquake strikes, and some basic effects give the impression that the subway is about to collapse. A confident all-American voice comes over the loudspeaker. Don't worry, folks. There's only one way out of this mess. Heads back. I'll push you out of here. Fast. Superman fast. If the riders had glanced at the back of their cars, they would see a scale figure of the Man of Steel himself outstretched behind them, who proceeds to push them out of danger at the advertised acceleration, after which a frenetic roller coaster experience ensues. The marketing blitz surrounding the opening Superman Escape was well-founded, and the ride's blistering acceleration made it the premier attraction at the park. More so, the coaster showed how story immersion could coexist with thrill rides. The pre-ride queuing not only creates a sense of story, but also helps to heighten the excitement of the ride itself. Of course, this attraction took up considerable space, and the installation of Superman Escape not only took the place of Movie Magic special effects show, but also encroached significantly on the Chinatown setting that housed the queue for Lethal Weapon the ride. Whether it's because the ride's popularity was already lagging, they anticipated it lagging with Superman Escape now poised as the park's premier thrill, or it was just deemed outdated with the last Lethal Weapon film having been released back in 1998, by cutting away such a large section of the attraction's designated queuing area, Lethal Weapon had clearly been deemed past its prime by 2006.
I'm too old for this.
Superman Escape would soon be joined by another superhero-themed thrill ride, the Batwing Space Shot, which opened just before Christmas in 2006. A space shot follows a basic concept that can nevertheless deliver considerable exhilaration. Essentially, riders strap in and are launched up and down a tall steel tower at rapid speeds via compressed air. In the case of the Batwing, this offered riders both up to 4 Gs of acceleration and heights of up to 60 meters, giving them the best view of the park, if only for a paltry 50 seconds total ride time. The vertical design of the attraction meant that it could be installed without major disruptions to the rest of the park, though it did finally mean the end of the Looney Tunes musical review, some 6 years after Bugs & Co. were turfed out of Looney Tunes Village. Even though by this time the park was incorporating street shows inspired by Christopher Nolan's first Batman movie, released in 2005, besides an identical bat symbol on the ride's logo, the Batwing Space Shot did not seem to tie into Nolan's film at all. Actually, outside of the logo and title, there doesn't seem to be much of a Batman integration at all, and unlike the Superman Escape, there was no semblance of story. I recall the premise being that riders were testing out the latest Wayne Tech technology designed by Lucius Fox, a character in both the comics and the Nolan films, but I can't find any evidence that this is the case. This may be an example of the Mandela effect, a term used to describe the phenomenon in which people remember that theme park rides were more directly themed towards intellectual properties than they actually were. Without even a themed queuing area, it fell far short of the immersion offered by either incarnation of Batman Adventure, the ride, or the more recent Superman Escape. However, while a 50-second duration is pretty brief considering how long you had to line up for, it was undeniably 50 seconds of frenzied enjoyment, which coincidentally I too can offer.
Am I the only one that screamed?
The loss of Movie Magic special effects show, and its replacement with Superman Escape, can be seen as representative of the park's larger shift away from behind-the-scenes movie insight and towards an emphasis on intellectual property, with particular regard to the DC family of superheroes. It could be argued that the short-lived Be a High Five Star studio, which allowed children to appear in a music video in a very similar vein to that special effects studio, one of the park's original offerings, was an attempt to continue the tradition. However, this attraction's tenure was ultimately too brief and too targeted at a younger audience to be reflective of any wider direction of the park as a whole. In its dedicated campaign, the Superman Escape was promoted on the basis of its speed and acceleration, i.e. its thrill factor, rather than any immersion into the Superman universe. But the work put into the latter, by means of pretty basic effects and voiceovers, shows that the two were not mutually exclusive, and that thrill rides could indeed offer immersion without sacrificing the enjoyment on offer. It was thus disappointing that the Batwing Space Shot, opening only a year later, did not offer anything similar, and it remained to be seen which model future attractions would follow. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to look at some of the Movie World merchandise I've acquired over the years, either at the park or scavenging through op shops and Facebook Marketplace and eBay. So I think we'll start at the more recent souvenirs and move backwards to the more vintage stuff. So on the more recent side, we've got this very cool What's Up Doc Bugs Bunny cap, posable ears somewhat. It's actually not bad. It's like quite good quality. You know, it's got like internal like printing and stuff like that. Like limited use, obviously. Not that many social situations where the What's Up Doc hat would be required, but if that situation does arise, it's certainly not the worst hat you could have. Lots of mugs. You find these like even just in op shops in Victoria in a completely different state. I guess a lot of people buy these mugs and then and then don't want them anymore, which is where I swoop in. So we've got a nice, very colourful Bugs one there, and Tweety's face there. Both got Movie World on the bottom there. And I suppose this is meant to be a more executive, more premium mug, but you can see it's scratching pretty badly there. Again, I don't need that many mugs. They do take up some space. How many mugs can you genuinely use? Not that many, it turns out. I much prefer things like this, these little keychains and pins, stuff that doesn't take up a lot of room, obviously. And this one here. I definitely like the more toon-orientated merchandise. There we go. Hours of fun for the whole family, and you've got the whole gang there. This is a picture I got from the most recent trip. Me just looking absolutely dejected with Bugs in the background. Actually, story of that, I wanted to get a picture with Bugs, obviously. So I lined up in the correct space, knowing where Bugs was going to be, as you do, as any normal 29-year-old does. And then when Bugs arrived, this dickhead with his young kids, like, cut to the front of the line, like in front of me. And I'm in that awkward position where I'm like, no, I was here first. But then also, am I going to say to your children, no, I'm meeting Bugs Bunny, the cartoon character, before you are, you 6-year-old. But I like that picture there. The frame actually wasn't from there. Again, this was just found at an op shop. Again, even if it's a different state, Movie World merch just finds its way into donation bins, which I think is a sad indictment on the state of the world. A Bugs Bunny Movie World Oscar trophy. It's got a magnet on it. Very cute. That was purchased at the park, as was this Movie World clapperboard. What is the... At least I can drink out of the mug. That has a purpose. What did I think was gonna be using this for? I don't know, it's kind of cool. It's movie related. I like it. So these are pretty cool. These are Visa prepaid Visa cash cards, essentially. Just use them in place of FPOS or cash. There's 3 different Movie World themed designs. So I don't know if they were sold at Movie World or just in promotion of Movie World. All have an expiry date of 1997 and 1998, so it gives you an idea of when they were issued. And the designs we've got, it's not focusing for me, but I'm sure you can make out that is Batman. I think that's Batman Forever Batman suit. And we've got this one, which is all the sort of characters assembled at the front of the park. It's not focusing, but there's some colourful characters there. I like these group shots that give like an indication of what was on offer at the park. And this is my favourite, I think, because it's the Lethal Weapon, but it's the Toons riding the Lethal Weapon. So I like it when the Toons are used in, I guess you'd say, uniquely Australian context, rather than just having just a picture of the Looney Tunes on it with no sort of specific park or specific Australian connection. We do have again the Toons on the Lethal Weapon, and actually it may be, yeah, it's the same art. This is more than I'd pay for a mug, but it's got my name on it. Like, how could I not, you know? I had to get that one. And you can see, like, again, specific Toons in this specific context, rather than just, you know, this could theoretically be sold anywhere if it wasn't for the Warner Brothers Movie World logo on it. It's nothing specifically to do with Movie World. So that's a very cool piece in this very cool collection. Sorry, I'm trying to organize all the mugs that I purchased. Movie World tea towel. Heavy on the Toons again. Oddly, they've got the inclusion next to my head there of oft-forgotten character Slowpoke Rodriguez, which is a very odd inclusion. Petunia Pig is there as well, and who is definitely not prominent in the shorts, but when they moved into sort of advertising, they needed a balance of female characters. Also, Bugs has got this very unique, I guess he's meant to be a director, and but you know, Daffy's in his tux, So again, kind of specific to the movie world context, so I appreciate that. Did I need a massive movie world tea towel? You know what? It turns out I didn't, but it was cheap. We've also got these drink bottles. First of all, we've got this one, Movie World Hollywood on the Gold Coast, and you can see it's advertising the Western, I imagine that's the Western action show, and the Police Academy show, and the Gremlins, and we've got Bugs up the top there. And so it gives you an idea of when that would be made. It's copyright 1992. Looney Tunes Police Academy Memphis Belle. Oh, that's the Memphis Belle there from the Movie Magic Special Effects show. A good showcase. I always like the merchandise that showcases defunct attractions. This one's a bit more generic, just with the tunes. It's a summer sports sipper, which I guess you could just call a drink bottle. You know, Tweety's got a surfboard, which is very Gold Coast, I guess. Bugs is just playing tennis, and Daffy's diving into what we can only presume is a pile of money based on the dollar signs around him. So not that specific to the context. But cooler than those drink bottles are the other drink bottles I have. Yeah, these were... I don't know if these specific ones were from 1991, but they definitely were available at the park, I think, pretty much from the get-go. So potentially they could be copyright 1990. There you go. I think they only had these two designs, that's my understanding, and this is what my brother purchased when we first went in 95? Did I say 95? When did I go to Movie World? 96. 96. See, it's connects to his body and he's jumping on Sylvester. Bugs is wearing a basketball outfit, like pre-Space Jam, but I don't know if this was in reference to the Hair Jordan, advertising campaign. And actually, I'm looking at this one now, it does say 1995. So maybe, I don't know, maybe this one wasn't quite as early as I thought. Again, you show up with these at school, no one's going to mess with you. And if they are, well, you've got the moral high ground. And that's all I have, except for this very cool magazine from May-June 1991, Movie Magazine. I believe it's an Australian exclusive. And it is pretty much announces Movie World before it opened. Movie Magic at Warner Brothers Movie World. So got some cool concept art there. The fact that it's all concept art makes me think it's very, very early on. And we've got a big fold-out map that I haven't actually opened, but it does show an early map of the park. And of course, Mel Gibson on the front cover being one of the celebrities to open it. Anyway, that's all. That's all I've acquired. I hope that was insightful. Back to the video. After a long hiatus, during which there was a global recession and Collingwood won their first premiership since 1990, not that I'm proposing those two events were linked in any way, I visited Movie World 3 times between December 2014 and April 2015. My experiences across these 3 trips will be compounded into one summary, because time is precious. Well, your time is. So what had changed since 2006? Robert Downey Jr., that's what. It's impossible to overstate the impact the successful execution of the Marvel Cinematic Universe had on superheroes as a genre of entertainment. Whether it was coincidental or directly inspired by the success of their competitors, DC Comics took the opportunity to wipe clear the slate of continuity in their comics and relaunch all their titles from issue 1 in September 2011, as a means to attract new readers who may otherwise have been daunted by the decades of lore that weighed down these classic characters. This process would include a visual redesign of the DC roster of heroes and villains, undertaken by artist Jim Lee, ensuring that they remained recognizable but with varying degrees of costume updates. All this is to say that Warner Brothers, DC's parent company, now had a stable of revamped superheroes on their hand, with an aesthetic that was unique and independent of whatever was happening on screen. After what could be considered a test run of attractions themed after superheroes but not tying into any one film, evidenced in Superman Escape and Batwing Space Shot in 2005 and 2006 respectively, Movie World would go all in on the DC universe, typically, though not exclusively, utilizing the comic book aesthetic of the New 52, for their rides and attractions. The first ride to embrace this was the brand new Green Lantern coaster, opened in December of 2011.
In brightest day, in blackest night, it's time to face the terror of Green Lantern's might. Huge 3.5 G-force. The world's steepest drop. Australia's craziest inverted spin. Do you dare take on the Green Lantern coaster? Face the power this summer with a super pass, only at Movie World.
The steel roller coaster still boasts the steepest drop of any roller coaster in the Southern Hemisphere, and you absolutely feel it. The entire coaster was, naturally, painted green, and featured a large icon of the titular character's power ring facing out to the car park, for some reason. As a ride entirely outside, again there isn't as much capacity to provide story, and along the queuing area, riders were treated only to large comic panels explaining the origin of the Green Lantern and pictures of the core characters from the story, all rendered in New 52 style. Zero reference to Ryan Reynolds' critically panned Green Lantern film, which released earlier in the year. Good call. The artwork was nice, and the designers managed to blend it in with statues to provide a great 3D effect in many places to give those queuing something to look at, but it wasn't much. There could have been a final panel or a voiceover or a screen telling the rider that the Green Lantern is going to make a path for them with his power ring so they can help chase Sinestro or Parallax or Blake Lively. Still, the green-tinged thrills offered by those steep drops spoke for themselves. Batman Adventure The Ride 2 closed in October 2011, having existed at the park across both iterations since 1992. Opening in September 2012 was its replacement, Justice League Alien Invasion 3D, an interactive dark ride that, like its predecessor, was aimed more at families than adrenaline junkies. And boy, you like immersion? I got your immersion right here. Sorry, I'll clean that up. Riders entered the Justice League's Hall of Justice headquarters, a magnificent set where TV monitors display live-action footage of news reports from all over the world. The reports explain that an intergalactic villain known as Starro the Conqueror is in the process of invading Earth, with cities being swamped by starfish-like creatures that affix themselves to the faces of their victims and possess them. One of the news reporters is named Cat Grant. Do you know who Cat Grant is? I didn't. But then I looked it up, and sure enough, she's a character in the DC universe. It's an example of the kind of detail that so few would notice, but is so rewarding for those that do. Queuing in the next room, a full-body animatronic cyborg, that's Cyborg the superhero, whose powers include being a cyborg, talks to an animated Batman on the screen behind him about developing a tactical assault weapon that works on the star aliens. The animatronic looks amazing and is integrated impressively with the other media. It probably wasn't intentional, but it does provide a great little throwback to the animatronic Batman from the ride's predecessor, with the added bonus of my parents not being present this time to pour scorn on the whole experience. Riders are then given 3D glasses, or, protective interstellar vision shields, and board the vehicles, which are transported by Batman to different cities in the DC universe to help repel the invasion. Seems irresponsible of Batman to send Barry from Cool and Gatter and his 10-year-old son to combat a hostile alien force, but what do I know? Affixed to each seat in the cars is an electronic laser weapon and a red LED scoreboard. As the cars travel at admittedly leisurely paces through the different cities, riders can take aim at the hundreds of star aliens around them. Hitting them will turn off their internal lighting, denoting that they've been hit, and add to the rider's score, meaning there is a competitive element to the whole experience. These settings all feature animatronic citizens with aliens attached to their faces. The movement of these animatronics is understandably limited, mostly lurching back and forth on the spot, so the whole experience carries the faint feeling of a carnival ghost train. In each setting, there is also an electronic display screen that shows one of the superheroes doing battle and asking for assistance from the riders. Now, the screens are meant to extend the setting, allowing for scenes that just wouldn't be possible to produce with practical effects, but the technology just isn't there and the screens just look like screens. It doesn't help that the animatronics are all quite realistic compared with the characters on the screens, which are quite cartoonish. So the integration between the two media falls flat. It's also lacking any kind of audio-visual effect to signify the vehicles being transported to different locations, as Batman claims is happening. Instead, doors just open and you move very slowly into another room.
Great job. I'm teleporting you to Metropolis.
Finishing in a spaceship setting, the riders help Superman defeat Starro himself. On another screen, of course. Starro apparently has a long history in the comics and was the first villain to face the United Justice League, so nice touch there. In the comics, the character is just an enormous version of his minions, a huge alien starfish with a single eye in his center. Now, this must have been deemed too lame for the ride, because here he's presented as a very bland and generic humanoid alien warlord. Perhaps this form also has a basis in the comics, but if it's a lifelong dream of yours to shoot a gigantic starfish, you'll go home disappointed. The ride ends with you returning to the Hall of Justice and the League appearing on screen to make all riders honorary members. But don't expect to appear in any of the comics. It would be impractical considering the number of riders being granted membership every day. It just wouldn't work. The interactive element of shooting the aliens and generating a score completely changes the dynamic of the experience and ensures the riders are never bored, despite the slow pace of the cars. Without the lasers, it would be very much that carnival ghost train rather than a cutting-edge interactive experience. The physical settings are fantastic, though suffering somewhat from a lack of variety until the arrival in the spaceship. They're also let down by the failure to integrate the screens into the set and by the limited movements of the animatronics. The visual of ordinary citizens with the stars attached to their faces is really creepy, and the animatronics should have been made to encroach on the riders a bit more. Scare the kids just a little bit. As for the 3D glasses, they're entirely unnecessary, and would not have been included was the ride not opened at a time in which 3D was absolutely definitely the technology of the future again. While it would be too slow for some, Justice League Alien Invasion 3D is overall an ideal ride for families, without expense being spared on any aspect of the experience. No giant starfish though. By 2015, Lethal Weapon The Ride was gone, but not demolished, instead closing in January 2012 to be rethemed to another IP. Honestly, Lethal Weapon was lucky to last as long as it did. Clearly the ride system itself was sufficient, but what would its new theming be? Well, after basing the new Green Lantern and Justice League attractions on DC's New 52 comic book universe, the designers went for something completely different with this one and based it instead on DC's Arkham Asylum video game universe. Batman Arkham Asylum was released across all major video game platforms in 2009 and was a huge critical and commercial success. The premise, in which the Joker takes over the titular madhouse of Gotham City, is replicated admirably in Arkham Asylum Shock Therapy, with both the external building and internal queuing area re-themed to look like the asylum itself, with lots of graffiti to indicate that the Joker is now running the show. The attention to detail here is really second to none, with so many easily missed references to the game's story. While queuing, riders will pass cells supposedly holding other Batman villains featured in the video game, each with specific details in their environment. Mr. Freeze's cell has icicles on the outside, while Poison Ivy's has leaves. Unfortunately, these details are just painted, and they could have splashed out just a little bit more to help liven up the experience. Perhaps green lit mist could periodically emanate from Ivy's cell, or the door to Killer Croc's could shake violently as he tries to escape. Expensive? Perhaps. But it would make me happy, and in the end, isn't that what's really important? Ride attendants wear the orange jumpsuits of Arkham inmates, and lead the riders into the newly designed trains, which resemble electric chairs. Presumably, the implications that the escaped inmates, under the orders of the Joker, are submitting the riders trapped in Arkham to the titular shock therapy. You know, in the form of a roller coaster. If Justice League Alien Invasion 3D places riders into a comic book, Shock Therapy most certainly placed them inside the Arkham Asylum game, and it's fantastic to see the lengths the designers went to replicate this experience. Apparently a common complaint against the Lethal Weapon was that the restraints did nothing to stop your head bashing against either side of the headrest, a charge that some also levelled against the ride in its updated Arkham form. But then, if you were going to be electrocuted, it would be uncomfortable, so it's actually more authentic if you do hurt your head. Originally, the trains were set to feature onboard audio, but this idea was dropped before the ride opened in April 2012. However, in late 2016, if you'll permit the brief jump forward, Movie World announced that Shock Therapy would become the Southern Hemisphere's first virtual reality roller coaster. How was a virtual reality roller coaster achieved? Well, for an extra $5, riders would be given a VR headset that synced up to the movements of the roller coaster, combining the thrills of the coaster with visuals that transported you into, presumably, Gotham City. Think Batman Adventure the Ride 2, but with the speed and excitement of a roller coaster rather than just a motion simulator. Now, I never rode this version, so take my verdict with a grain of salt, but I do have some reservations. As important as immersion and story is in rides, this doesn't have to necessarily extend beyond the queuing area. Enjoyment of an attraction like Shock Therapy can be enhanced dramatically by all the details included in the queuing area. Would it have been advanced further by wearing a headset during what is, on its own, a very exciting roller coaster? Perhaps for some, but the VR roller coaster concept hasn't really caught on yet. Elsewhere, while Wild West Falls remained as exciting as ever, it was clear that by 2015, the whole Western-themed precinct of the park had very little else to offer. The area is tucked away in the corner of the park, so you don't visit it unless you're already travelling there specifically. This could theoretically help to create the illusion of stepping back in time, but only if there's enough activity there. Remember, the western area had been present at the park for several years before the installation of Wild West Falls, with first the Wild West Stunt Show and then Maverick Grand Illusion Show, giving visitors a reason to stroll around the western-themed facades and have a chuckle at the tombstones in Boot Hill Cemetery. Cowpersons and Indians, were featured very heavily as part of the park's early publicity. The Western genre of cinema was one that Movie World clearly thought was worth paying tribute to, not least because Warner Bros. Owned the rights to so many classics of the genre. By 2015, however, there wasn't a steady stream of family-friendly Western films in the cinema to keep the genre relevant. Big-budget attempts to revive the genre had all flopped hard. 2010's Jonah Hex, 2011's Cowboys and Aliens, 2013's The Lone Ranger, and let's not forget Wild Wild West itself, though everybody else did. And successful westerns of the decade tended to be blood-soaked pastiches like 2012's Django Unchained, or gripping character dramas like 2010's True Grit. In short, the kind of western movies that Movie World was trying to represent in their park no longer existed at the box office. Fortunately, this same malaise was not affecting Looney Tunes Village. The precinct was renamed Kids WB Zone in 2007, probably to better coincide with the children's television block Kids WB, which began airing the previous year on Channel 9. The program would feature a variety of new and old Warner Bros. Cartoons, interspersed with live-action segments from the hosts, which were occasionally shot at Movie World itself. 2007 also saw the arrival of two new rides, the Looney Tunes Carousel, a simple merry-go-round featuring various well-crafted Looney Tunes designs, and Sylvester's Pounce and Bounce, essentially a kiddie version of the Batwing space shot, moving the young riders up and down a tree-shaped base. The carriage has a Sylvester figure sitting atop it, so when he rises to the top of the tree, he appears to be struck on the head by Tweety, holding a comically large mallet. It's humorous, but if it happened in real life, the cat would probably die. In a kids-themed precinct, the designers could probably have gotten away with just generic carnival attractions, so it's encouraging to see them utilise the Looney Tunes IP on even the more basic rides. And speaking of the tunes, 2011 saw the closure of one of the few remaining opening day attractions, the Looney Tunes River Ride. On a personal level, as a big fan of Looney Tunes, I'm sad that it closed, and sadder still that I visited the park 3 times when it was operational and never rode it. On the other hand though, yeah, of course Looney Tunes River Ride couldn't last. The ride was meandering and slow. The settings meant to capture your young family's attention were beautifully crafted, but there just wasn't enough happening there. The animatronic tunes looked amazing, but barely moved. It would have been an awesome attraction for families in 1991, but compared to Justice League Alien Invasion 3D, opening only a year after it closed, it looked woefully outdated. Combined with reports that the animatronics were showing their age after 2 decades on the job, and that the ride was frequently being shut for extended periods of repair, it's not surprising Looney Tunes River Ride finally shut up shop for good. Rumours that they stuffed a human body inside the animatronic Foghorn Leghorn and that he still roams the park after dark have not been confirmed. 3 years after closure, the ride was replaced with Junior Driving School, in which young children board small cars and drive around an indoor area at low speeds. Unlike Speedy Gonzales' Tijuana taxis, operating only a few short meters away, rather than a single circular track, Driving School offered an entire street setting with multiple lanes and intersections for children to disregard entirely. Riders even got personalised driver's licenses printed for them before the ride, which were not torn up in front of them if they raked up too many infractions, but they really should have been, lest Movie World encourage poor on-road behaviour at an early age. There are multiple members of staff on hand to supervise, but the speeds are so low I feel like there's very little risk of toddler road rage. For very young children, this would be a lot of fun, but it is quite generic, and it's an attraction that wouldn't be out of place in just a suburban shopping mall, were it not for its unique saving grace. The children are driving through a miniature version of Movie World itself, with all the rides and buildings of the park recreated in very impressive miniature detail. So while it's a shame that Looney Tunes' theming of the attraction's predecessor was lost, Junior Driving School was demonstrably a bespoke attraction made specifically for Movie World. Another much-loved opening day attraction had closed since my last trip. Police Academy Stunt Show had its final performance in April 2008, replaced in December of the same year with a brand new show, Hollywood Stunt Driver, followed by a sequel, Hollywood Stunt Driver 2, in 2014. The show features a director filming a car chase scene in an Italian village, while his overbearing producer barks commands at him from the big screen behind him. Both the attraction and its sequel focus heavily on cool stunt dudes in cool stunt cars doing cool stunt things, with very little of the slapstick comedy of the Police Academy show. Neither incarnation seems to be greatly appreciated by hardcore park goers, many of whom consider it a poor replacement for its iconic predecessor. On the other hand, Police Academy was hardly a relevant franchise to base an attraction on by 2008. And Stunt Driver's premise does harken back to the park's original vision of Hollywood on the Gold Coast. If you were a kid who bought his Hot Wheels cars to play with in the sandpit at school, you probably would love Stunt Driver. Following the closure of Shrek 4D Adventure in 2010, the Roxy Theatre had begun showing several short 4D films based on different movies. First, WB's own Journey to the Center of the Earth from 2010 to 2012, followed by Blue Sky's Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs until 2014, and Rio until 2015. Remember how Shrek 4D was an original story that fit within the continuity of the film franchise? These replacements were not that, and were instead heavily condensed versions of the original films with added effects. So consider the viewing experience of both myself and the 6-year-old boy I found myself sitting behind in 2014, watching Rio the 4D experience. The kid's already seen Rio, maybe at the movies or maybe he has it on DVD, so he sits down and quickly realizes all he's going to get after lining up is a handful of familiar scenes with some new 4D effects. Meanwhile, I haven't seen Rio, so all I get is a handful of unfamiliar scenes with added 4D effects. I mean, I was able to work out the larger story, it's Rio, not Kung Fu Panda, but the fact remains that both of us would have gotten more enjoyment out of an original story, which, of course, is more expensive and time-consuming to produce. By the end of 2015, when my trilogy of visits drew to a close, it was clear that Movie World had decided their immediate future was in DC superheroes and thrill rides, if possible, both at once. The superheroes provided a family-friendly presence at the park in the form of attractions, walk-around characters, and merchandise, and undoubtedly seemed like a sound investment as DC's cinematic universe belatedly began to take shape across the screen. The addition of Green Lantern and the revamping of Lethal Weapon into Arkham Asylum Shock Therapy boosted the stocks of thrill rides on offer, joining the likes of Wild West Falls, Superman Escape, Batwing Space Shot, and to a lesser extent, Scooby-Doo Spooky Coaster. Just as the investment in Kids WB Zone a few years previous ensured that young children could be occupied for an entire day, the variety of thrill rides on offer now would make the park more attractive to an entirely different demographic, the schoolies crowd. Schoolies is the traditional Australian holiday in which 18-year-olds, in celebration of finishing their Year 12 exams, book a cheap hotel and annihilate themselves on alcopops over the course of a week filled with sunstroke and highly regrettable romantic encounters. With its sun, its beaches, and its tourist traps, the Gold Coast is a natural choice of destination for the young lads and ladies middle class enough for their parents to afford the trip. While some 18-year-olds would be happy enough to spend a day just snapping a picture with Tweety Bird and paying $15 for an ice cream, others that might consider that a waste of time and money could now be thoroughly tempted to spend a day at Movie World in order to experience the thrills available nowhere else in the country. The downside to both children and thrill seekers being catered to with specific attractions in the park is that it came at the cost of family-friendly staples of the park's early years. Looney Tunes River Ride, Police Academy Stunt Show, and Batman Adventure The Ride 2 had all been replaced with attractions of varying quality, and while time will tell, it seems unlikely that attractions such as Junior Driving School or Hollywood Stunt Driver will be remembered as fondly as their predecessors. Along with the neglect of the Western-themed area of the park, which was once such a heavily advertised aspect of what Movie World had to offer, but had received no new attractions since the end of 1998, for better or worse, much of what defined the park in 1991, be it the tone and theming of the attractions or the attractions themselves, was gone by 2015, in the pursuit of many big thrills and one big franchise. Village Roadshow Studios on the Gold Coast has been the location of dozens of famous film and television productions since 1991. But as one of the premier theme parks in the country, Movie World itself has made several appearances on Australian television over the years, outside of the to-be-expected advertisements and news featurettes. Just prior to its grand opening in 1991, Movie World hosted an episode of long-running Australian variety show Hey Hey It's Saturday, which featured interviews with both Clint Eastwood and Kurt Russell, who were in town for the park's opening, as well as Yahoo Serious, whose film Young Einstein had been the inspiration for the Gravity Homestead attraction. The broadcast contains some of the only available footage of that particular attraction, as well as plenty of skits and featurettes based around other early features of the park, including Movie Magic Special Effects Show, Police Academy Stunt Show, and Western Action Show. There's even a music video for singer Jackie Love's Get On Your Feet, shot almost entirely within the Looney Tunes River Ride, providing a very valuable look at that attraction with the lights on, assuming you consider that kind of thing valuable. Perhaps you don't. If you're interested in the way the park used to look, definitely seek out this episode, providing it isn't locked away behind the Hey Hey It's Saturday streaming service. That's not a joke, by the way. For $6.99 a month, you can access almost 3 decades worth of episodes of an Australian variety show that ended in 1999 at heyhey.tv. Who's watching old episodes of Hey Hey It's Saturday frequently enough to justify paying a monthly subscription service? Who was this made for? One of the sketches in the episode is a short film noir parody starring Hey Hey host Daryl Summers, doing what might generously be described as a Humphrey Bogart impression. Obviously this idea stuck with Daryl, because 1 year later the Hey Hey team would return to Movie World to film a 40-minute television special called Silence of the Hams. Silence of the Hams is not to be confused with the 1994 spoof film The Silence of the Hams, which Time Out of London called a, quote, wholly redundant exercise. The film was shot in a single week to celebrate both the first birthday of the park and 50 years since the release of Casablanca. You will, of course, recall that Casablanca was represented at the park in the form of Rick's Cafe American, which featured heavily as a setting in the film. The film stars Summers as Detective Rick Shaw, trying to stop the villainous Chinese stereotype Fu from destroying the movie industry. It also features Hey Hey cast members Red Simons and Russell Gilbert in supporting roles, while Summers' co-host Ozzy the Ostrich, a pink ostrich portrayed by puppeteer Ernie Carroll, plays Fu. Essentially, they put a Fu Manchu mustache on the ostrich puppet and made him speak Confucianisms.
So, Confucius, he say, a girl who wants big parts in movies must have big parts.
Couldn't do that these days. Don't know why you'd want to. The film is not very funny at all, but to its credit, it does not attempt to be anything more than a cheesy little project put together in very little time. Hey Hey It's Saturday is a veritable Australian institution which ran for almost 30 years on Australian television, and I'm sure if you're part of the generation that grew up watching it, you will probably have a chuckle. Today, the blackface is a bit much. Like, in just 40 minutes, there's a fair bit of blackface, and the weirdest thing is this wouldn't even be the most famous occasion of blackface on Hey Hey It's Saturday. All things considered, it looks good. There are multiple scenes shot at Movie World but not set in Movie World, and it's a testament to the work of the park designers that with some creative camera work and lighting, they just look like they were shot on a studio backlot. In 1993, Movie World would feature on an episode of the Australian sketch and satire series The Late Show as the setting for one of the Shit Scared series of sketches. Shit Scared featured cast members Rob Sitch as an arrogant stuntman and Mick Malloy as his hapless assistant, attempting to coordinate stunts to painful results. This episode has Rob enlisted as stunt coordinator at Movie World to oversee the stunts at Police Academy Stunt Show and Western Action Show. Pretty funny if you like the team behind it, but it doesn't actually showcase anything at the park not already seen in that Hey Hey special. Actually, another Late Show sketch from the same year makes reference to Movie World in a parody of the short-lived soap opera Paradise Beach. Paradise Beach aired from 1993 to 1994 on Channel 9 and was produced by Village and shot on the Gold Coast. The sketch mocks the show's poor acting, formulaic plots, and supposed frequent references to Village's Movie World.
Hey, you're nuts. Let's have some comic relief. Hey, Warner Brothers Movie World.
However, a cursory scrub through the episodes of Paradise Beach uploaded to YouTube don't reveal anything of the sort, which is why it doesn't feature on this list. Don't know why I mentioned it, sorry. The park would be the setting for the music video of Australian pop star Nikki Webster's 2003 cover of Dancing in the Street. According to Nikki Webster's professional biography, around this time she was the quote-unquote face of Movie World, which appears to have amounted to this music video, a public appearance or two at the park, and a television commercial in which she performs an absolutely appalling jingle. Side note, this video was the cause of at least one complaint to the Advertising Standards Bureau, in which the complainant stated,
"The ad promoted Movie World and featured a preteen girl performing a dance similar to what you would only see in an adult-only environment. Both my wife and I were shocked and appalled at the content of this ad. We found it to be sexually suggestive. We cannot tolerate this."
The complaint was dismissed. Finally, Kids WB Australia, the aforementioned children's television block which ran from 2006 until 2009, was occasionally hosted from the park and would be a perfect fit in consideration of the newly renamed Kids WB Fun Zone Precinct. January 2022. Interstate and international travel was finally opening up to Australians after some of the longest coronavirus lockdowns in the world. And my mad mates and I decided to celebrate with a trip to a certain coast named after a certain scientific element with 79 proton. It was Gold Coast, we went to the Gold Coast. It was a joyous celebration of life after none of us died of COVID. We were alive, and so was the park, with more to offer than ever before despite some enormous challenges in the preceding years. October 2016 saw a tragic accident at neighbouring Dreamworld that killed 4 people when one of the park's popular rides malfunctioned. It's a horrific story that doesn't need to be dwelled upon, but poor safety standards were ultimately to blame, and it was shocking that something so appalling could occur at one of the country's premier tourist attractions. Even though Dreamworld wasn't operated by Village, it was enough to cause a drop in attendance across all the major theme parks as they grappled with extensive safety audits. Only a month earlier, Movie World had debuted an entirely new precinct on the former site of the beloved Boot Hill Graveyard. What would be the theme of this new area? Well, you'll recall that the decade from 2005 onwards had seen an ever-increasing presence of DC Comics superhero-themed attractions. So in 2016, the park attempted something completely out of left field by basing the precinct on DC Comics supervillains.
The world's first theme park area dedicated to DC supervillains is now open. It's good to be bad. And being bad just got really good. Discover your bad side with the Village Theme Parks membership from just $10 a month. Now with unlimited entry to 4 parks.
While obviously an influx of comic book themed attractions was nothing new, having an entirely new precinct at the park certainly was. Entitled DC Comics Supervillains Unleashed, the area was designed to resemble a city under attack by enemies of the Justice League. The villains are represented by statues with which attendees can interact via RFID wristbands, more on that shortly. And the centerpiece of the area was the Doomsday Destroyer, a suspended twin hammer thrill ride named and themed after the Superman nemesis. The ride was joined a year later by the DC Comic Rivals Hypercoaster, though this was located outside of the new precinct. The Hypercoaster, which for all intents and purposes is just a roller coaster with a really, really big drop, once again marked the biggest financial investment in a single attraction in the park's 30-year history, and was the tallest, fastest, and longest coaster in Australia. Elsewhere in the park, an Aquaman exhibit showcasing props from the surprisingly successful film of the same name opened in 2018. The iconic Scooby-Doo Spooky Coaster was refurbished and reopened as Scooby-Doo Spooky Coaster The Next Generation the same year. The WB Showcase opened in 2019, showing off props from recent WB blockbusters, before converting 2 years later to Batman Legacy, which focused on WB's extensive history of Batman films. Additionally, Arkham Asylum Shock Therapy, a few years after the introduction of the aforementioned VR headset option for the ride, closed forever. Not to be rethemed, as was the case with Lethal Weapon the Ride, but dismantled entirely. At the Roxy, Rio the 4D experience, Grown, was replaced with Looney Tunes 4D starring Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. While the 4D effects for all of these short films are generally the same, Looney Tunes 4D did have the advantage of actually featuring the Looney Tunes, characters already present in the park, and for being a short film rather than just a severely truncated feature film that had already been released a few years earlier. This ran for 5 years until 2020, when it was replaced with a severely truncated version of the 2010 Yogi Bear film, which had been released a few years earlier. Needless to say, the pandemic also took an enormous toll on the park's attendance from 2020 to 2022, as Village not only had to contend with the closure of Australia's international border, but various changing state border closures, severely limiting regular patterns of tourism. It was only a few months after the end of this that my gang of lovable miscreants and I arrived, and judging by the lines at the park gates, we were not the only ones keen to get out and about in Movie World again. I came away with a number of observations about the state of the park in 2022. The DC Rivals Hypercoaster was a lot of hype. The new Hypercoaster was to be our first port of call once we got through the gates, and boy! It may surprise you coming from the guy making the video you're currently watching, but I wasn't keeping up to date with developments at Movie World between visits, so I really didn't know what to expect from the country's tallest, fastest, longest thrill ride. Well, it was a long, long wait to start the day. Waiting in the outdoor queuing area, it was all I could do not to make unfavourable comparisons once again to the story elements present in the queuing area of both Superman Escape and Justice League Alien Invasion 3D, because there was nothing of the sort in DC Rivals. While unlike those attractions, it did feature an outdoor queuing area which limits the amount of story integration, there wasn't even the same degree of visual design present on the Green Lantern coaster, just a series of murals depicting the heroes pitted against the villains, and small TV screens playing, when I was there, the same HBO Max trailer for films of the DCEU on repeat. The promotional trailer for the ride presents it as representative of some sort of epic clash between the Justice League and their rivals, but it's just a roller coaster. It could be renamed anything and remain the same experience. Why not have those TV screens showing videos of the different teams trying to recruit the riders? Why not have the cars painted different colours to distinguish the two sides? The display at the peak of the coaster track is just the Joker's face, which looks cool, but shouldn't it be something more encompassing of the name and the theme? All of these improvements cost money, but again, this is already the most expensive attraction in the park's history. Could they not splash out just a little bit extra for a more complete experience? As a result of waiting so long in a line without anything to occupy your attention, or any elements of story to focus on, my final impression of DC Rivals was, that was fun. And that's all. It may be the tallest, fastest, longest coaster, but I don't think it was far and away the best by any means. This is just my experience, of course. Many people will love the thrills offered by DC Rivals and could not give a solitary toss about the lack of theming. But I think there comes a point of diminishing returns when you're focusing only on the speed and height statistics. Ultimately, it's those immersive elements you end up remembering just as much as the drops and the loops and the turns. Supervillains Unleashed was awesome. Almost. An entirely new precinct was a big deal for the park. Unlike at the Disney parks, Movie World's attractions aren't sectioned off into different areas. Besides the Wild West and Kids WB zone, they just sort of branch off from Main Street, so the ability to step into a small section completely dedicated to one theme was really cool, even if that one theme was the already overrepresented world of DC Comics. The building facades were well designed with a few nice details to create the illusion of the city of Metropolis being under attack.
So this is presumably some Joker-inspired graffiti just in this zone here that says, heroes need to win every time, villains only need to win once, which I like the theming that they've got the Joker, like, graffitiing stuff. I don't know if this is a famous quote, but the version I'm most familiar with is the one which came out in response to the failed Brighton hotel bombing in 1984, in which members of the IRA tried to assassinate Margaret Thatcher and then responded, Mrs. Thatcher has to be lucky every time, we only need to be lucky once. And I don't know if that's what they were trying to make me think of when I'm right in front of a big gorilla.
Around the centerpiece of the Doomsday Destroyer, the only actual ride in the precinct, were statues of many of the premier villains of the DC universe in various states of mischief and mayhem. If you scanned your RFID wristbands near the statues, there would be varying levels of interactivity. For example, Captain Cold, the Audi brand Mr. Freeze, allows you to play a short puzzle game on a touchscreen to save the day. The Joker offers you a chance to test your strength with a TNT detonator, and Gorilla Grodd, the frightful nemesis of the Flash, what is a genius and also a gorilla, lets you wreck up a diner using a wide augmented reality display. There's so much variety with what the different characters offer, and I can certainly imagine kids running from one to the next desperate to try them out. Providing their parents already coughed up, that is. Yeah, those RFID bands cost extra. Available for $15 from the Precinct's themed retail outlet in a variety of comic designs. If you've got 2 kids, that's an extra $30 you have to spend after already forking out hundreds just to get your family through the gate, but before you'll need to spend another $40 just for some goddamn hot chips. A good compromise would be to give out a basic version of the wristband for very cheap, and then charge extra for the cool designs. That way the Povo children could have fun, but the children whose parents know what franking credits are could still lord it over them, as it should be. If I had purchased a wristband, I would certainly scan it for any children hanging around, to let them have a go at the minigames themselves, because that's the kind of person I am. But I didn't buy a wristband. And it wouldn't have impressed many children if I did, because almost all of the interactive stations were out of order when I visited. Yeah, it was hugely disappointing. Now, this was a time of severe staff shortages nationwide. Maybe Australia's RFID technicians were very busy post-lockdown repairing all the other machines that utilised that particular technology, none of which I can name. But this is one attraction that you could run all day without any staff involvement. Captain Cold can't catch a cold, ironically, probably one of his superpowers actually. Also, the woman who worked at the gift shop from which the wristbands were purchased told me how they worked, but not that hardly any of the stations were functional that day. Maybe don't have them available for purchase if patrons are going to discover moments later that they've just wasted their money. It's even more disappointing because the whole Villains Unleashed premise and presentation is still really cool. The statues of the villains, even if they weren't functioning, had a lot of detail and life and personality, and they're all shown interacting with the city environment in unique ways. It shows that when the designers have a dedicated space with a clear theme to adhere to, they can create an immersive environment. As for Doomsday Destroyer, the attraction that justified the creation of the whole precinct, I didn't have time to write it. It's designed well to resemble the titular Superman villain, but reviews of the experience have been somewhat mixed. The Wild West needs to die already. Hey, remember all that stuff I said about the state of the Wild West precinct in 2015? About there being no reason to visit that area in the park were it not for the singular thrill ride it contained? All of that in 2022. But worse. Both Villains Unleashed and the Batman Legacy exhibition now open up into the precinct, which does break the once carefully crafted immersion completely. You never saw John Wayne walk off from the prairie and then into a warehouse to look at Michael Keaton's bat jockstrap. Worse still, Villains Unleashed meant the complete removal of Boot Hill Graveyard. And while from a business perspective that's definitely a trade worth making, it is just another huge chunk of Western-themed real estate cast aside. If you've ever seen those maps showing successive partitions of the state of Poland in the 18th century, you'll understand. The Wild West precinct of Warner Brothers Movie World really is exactly like the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the 18th century, and no, I will not elaborate further. Officially, Boot Hill Graveyard wasn't removed. It was relocated to the viewing area next to Wild West Falls, but no one's buying that line. All they did was move the arch and some of the tombstones into an inaccessible garden. If you can't interact with it in any way, it's not an attraction, it's just decoration. Still better than just throwing the props into a dumpster. Actually, this area went viral on TikTok due to it being a designated smoking area at the park, which some found funny considering it's a graveyard. But Village denied it was an intentional statement about the risks of smoking. So, no walk-through graveyard, no street shows, no cafes or restaurants opened in the precinct, at least not when I was there at peak season. The gift shop was a depressing sight, mostly just selling generic tat that could have been available anywhere, rather than Movie World specific tat that's only available at the park. It was honestly quite insulting. Even the TV screens were gone from the queuing area of Wild West Falls, leaving just a few vintage movie posters and pieces of antiquated machinery, which is not the level of detail expected from Australia's premier theme park. The precinct is a massive waste of precious park real estate. Either commit to the Wild West theme with additional small-scale shows and attractions, or close it down and re-theme it entirely. Neither option is cheap, but that money is surely going to have to be spent eventually. Batman Legacy is cool. It's a great idea to have a walkthrough exhibition dedicated to Warner Bros.' history of Batman films. WB have produced about 10 live-action films featuring Batman since 1989, so chances are everybody coming through those gates have seen at least one. And rather than focusing on a single film like the preceding Aquaman exhibit, this showcases props and costumes from all of Batman's cinematic adventures. This also has the added advantage of not focusing on Aquaman, the punchline superhero. It was a nice experience reflecting even briefly on my memories of those many films and seeing some of those iconic pieces from the movies I've loved all my life up close. The best part was seeing the different Batman cows light up, representing the many different interpretations of the character over the years. Superhero fatigue has well and truly set in for the general public, but superhero films resonate with people for a reason, so why shouldn't Village embrace it? This is a low-maintenance way for the park to fulfill that original mission of bringing a taste of Hollywood to the parkgoers. Even if it focuses exclusively on a single franchise, it's good. The Main Street Parade was depressing. The Main Street Parade, modelled on that offered at the Disney parks, can be, when implemented correctly, a whimsical showcase of what the park has to offer. All the different characters from the various different franchises on display in a musical extravaganza. What I witnessed in 2022 amounted to a chore set to pop music. It's difficult to explain. All the costume characters have permanent smiles, so how on earth did they all look so bored? Movie World parades are usually a lot of fun, so it's entirely possible this again could be put down to COVID-related shortages of costume dancing animals, but there was zero joy to be found in that February performance. If it took place at a Disney park, those performers would have all been taken behind Splash Mountain and shot in the back of the head. Kids WB Zone is great. Nothing really to add to that. There were no new attractions that I haven't already discussed, but it bears repeating that this is a quality, child-friendly precinct in the park. Almost all attractions were operational, and everybody seemed to be having a nice time. Despite the name change from Looney Tunes Village and the replacement of Looney Tunes River Ride with the Junior Driving School, it is still very much the Looney Tunes precinct in the park. And anything that keeps alive the legacy of one of the 20th century's greatest artistic achievements should be applauded. Go on, applaud. I'll wait. Scooby-doo Spooky Coaster Next Generation is a scarily severe downgrade. As stated in 2018, the beloved park standard was refurbished and reopened as Scooby-doo Spooky Coaster Next Generation. But what did Next Generation denote? The original incarnation of the ride was a mixture of a traditional, albeit high-budget ghost train with a Mad Mouse-style roller coaster. In the new version, the ghost train portion had many of its practical effects replaced with electronic display and projection screens. As displayed in the context of Justice League Alien Invasion 3D, it's very difficult to combine practical effects with projection-mapped screens and maintain a coherent sense of scenery. And here, those issues are compounded by the baffling choice of images on display. You see, even after the significant refurbishment, Spooky Coaster Next Generation is still themed specifically to a particular sequence from the 2002 live-action Scooby-Doo film. A decade and a half after the release of that film, Next Generation could have represented a good opportunity to theme the attraction more to the wider Scooby franchise, but the designers stuck with one sequence from that film. However, it's not the sequence seemingly written for the purpose of having a theme park ride based on it. That was the old ride, but the scene in the movie where the purple demons start flying around. The end result is an abundance of screen besotted with ugly monsters. The CGI characters in that movie looked rough, even by 2002 standards. So it was a terrible idea to resurrect them almost 20 years later without any visual improvement. Like, think of the infamous CGI in the 1997 special edition of Star Wars, but instead of Jabba the Hutt, it's Scrappy-Doo, the dog that everyone hates. The ride is still fast-paced and exciting. Maybe if this was the original version of the ride, it wouldn't be worth commenting on. But knowing what a great experience the original ride offered, it's disheartening to see that it was actually made worse during a so-called upgrade. A big reason for the refurbishment was the degradation of the physical props and sets, so it's admirable that they chose not to let it fall into complete disrepair like they did with Looney Tunes River Ride. But the final experience is more reminiscent of watching a series of YouTube kids videos than a joyously spooky ride on a ghost train. I've been pretty critical about a lot of things at the park, but truthfully, I had a great time. Even with its many creative missteps, Movie World is fun. I like guys fresh out of high school dressed up as cartoon characters that reached the peak of their cultural relevance in the 1950s. I like casting a critical eye to try and work out which franchises are getting the most representation in the merchandise. And I like determining if the new attractions offer a better or worse experience than the ones they're replacing. But enough about me. You're watching this because you want to know how Movie World has changed. Not just since my last visit, but since that fabled day in 1991 when Clint Eastwood poured that first frosty beer. Before we offer final judgment, let's look at some of the seasonal and one-off events that have been hosted at the park in the preceding decades. One of the earliest special events hosted at Movie World was Illuminanza, presumably an effort to emulate the light parades offered at night at the Disney parks. Throughout June and July of 1992, to celebrate the park's first birthday, there would be a nighttime sound and light show on Main Street set to classic WB movie themes. It would also feature a Looney Tunes parade and a finale in which Batman climbed up one of the building facades and completed a lengthy zipline above the street. The whole thing really has a great sense of scope, and it's not obvious why it didn't carry on in a different format over the years. From the promotional footage, the funniest part is watching the Looney Tunes speak. Of course, none of the costumes have any moving facial features, so when the actors are miming along to their pre-recorded part, they have to gesticulate wildly to indicate that they're the one who's speaking.
And, Sylvester, you love a party.
Fluffer and fuckatash! I want to celebrate by eating a Tweety bird.
Ooh, I thought I heard a putty tat.
It's a video for another time, but after Warner Brothers cancelled the Looney Tunes cinematic shorts in the 1960s, the company really had no use for the characters, until they started utilising them a few decades later in the manner you see in Illuminanza. That is, essentially just recognisable advertising mascots, void of all the motivation and personality that made them so famous in the first place, save for the occasional catchphrase.
What do you think, Daffy? I think you're despicable.
Why do you think he's despicable? He didn't do anything. F*** you. In Halloween 2006, the park experimented with a Halloween Family Fun Night, which featured unique theming and special costumed characters. Most of the rides would continue to be operational, offering guests a great chance to experience them at night. This event would continue until 2009, when it was rebranded as Halloween Fright Nights, eschewing the family-friendly environment for something decidedly not for children. Fright Nights has continued ever since as an additional ticketed event, featuring specially built mazes based on popular horror franchises like Saw and Nightmare on Elm Street, unique concerts, live shows, and different escape rooms. It's clear that Halloween Fright Nights isn't just a few jack-o'-lanterns and cobwebs strung up, and that the park really does offer something unique at that time of the year. Starting in 2010, the park began offering a seasonal December event called White Christmas. Wow, original name, how did they come up with that? Similar to Fright Nights, it's an additional ticketed event that begins after the park's closure on certain evenings in December, though this one is definitely aimed at the kiddies, with unique Christmas parades and live shows, as well as a Looney Tunes on Ice show performed on a specially created skating rink. There were also a series of further festivities available as additional paid experiences if your parents really loved you. With this model of additional ticketed events proving profitable, Movie World introduced the Mardi Gras-inspired Carnival in 2014 for the month of June. Even though both Carnival in Rio and Mardi Gras in New Orleans are both typically held towards the end of February. It also featured specialty theming and parades, heavy on green and purple, with an atmosphere of one big nighttime party. Compared to the White Christmas Parade, which just looks like the usual Main Street parade except Tweety is dressed as Santa, this does at least look like a significantly different experience. But would I pay $120 additional just for the privilege of watching some fire twirling and then buying some Creole cuisine? Probably not. For all I know, that authentic Cajun jambalaya was made by some guy from Toowoomba. The event returned in 2015 and 2016, when it was also adopted at the other Gold Coast parks brought under Village's control by that stage, SeaWorld and Wet n Wild, though the event was subsequently shelved and now operates only at SeaWorld. The safest place for families to party at night is next to large bodies of water with sad dolphins. From June 2021, to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the park, there was a month-long celebration called Hooray for Hollywood. This was ostensibly the park turning a spotlight on that Hollywood golden age that was so neglected for so long. But in reality, it was more of a celebration of the park's defunct characters and attractions. Along with the standard canon of park favourites, Hooray for Hollywood included some specially erected backgrounds for photos with your favourites and old favourites. Austin Powers, the Police Academy team, Gizmo from Gremlins, the crew from the Memphis Belle, which was one of the segments featured in the Movie Magic special effects show, Bonnie and Clyde, Trinity and Neo, Charlie Chaplin, Dorothy and her freeloading friends from Wizard of Oz. Now, how many of these characters were played by returning cast members is unknown, but regardless, it's a fantastic initiative. If the park still has the rights and the costumes, why not dust them off once a year? You can't resurrect the Great Gremlin Adventure, but there's nothing stopping you from having guests take pictures with Gizmo. The Roxy Theatre even went back to showing Marvin the Martian in the Third Dimension, which originally ran from 1997 to 2005. Not the original Adventures in the Fourth Dimension, though. God damn it, give us that Blu-ray release. Hooray for Hollywood acknowledged that the park itself had a history that extended beyond the current attractions, and has been an annual feature at Movie World ever since. Hooray for Hollywood. This video has explored the changes at Warner Bros. Movie World between the times of my own periodic visits. Taking a step back and looking at the park's entire history, we can see generally that both the kinds of attractions on offer and the theming of those attractions have changed significantly since 1991. Today, the park's major attractions are predominantly thrill rides that are prohibitive for many members of the family. There are still indeed family-friendly rides at the park. Scooby-doo Spooky Coaster is, or at least was until its most recent refurbishment, a well-loved attraction and a suitable replacement for Great Gremlin Adventure. Justice League Alien Invasion 3D, while less revered, is great for the kids too old to enjoy Kids WB Zone, but perhaps not old enough for the Spooky Coaster or Wild West. But the biggest investments at the park since the turn of the century have been those high-intensity thrill rides, each one aiming to top its predecessor in one statistic or another. For better or worse, compared to 20 years ago, there just isn't the same dedication to providing the public with new attractions that are both high quality and family friendly. In terms of theming, there's been a similar decline in the variety of franchises upon which attractions at the park are based. Let's again reiterate that the Western theming and characters were heavily featured at the park and in the promotional material even before the Wild West Falls thrill ride was opened. Up until the 2000s, cowboys were considered a draw in of themselves. For one reason or another, quite possibly due to the overall decline in popularity of the Western genre as a whole, that's no longer the case. And the ongoing neglect present in the Wild West precinct is a symptom of this phenomenon. Discounting exhibitions like the recent Batman Legacy, the last major attraction to be based on a live-action film was the Spooky Coaster in 2002. Prior to that, there had been The Great Gremlin Adventure, Young Einstein Gravity Homestead, Police Academy Stunt Show, Batman Adventure the Ride, Lethal Weapon, The Maverick Grand Illusion Show, and technically Wild West Falls. Since then, we've had Superman Escape and Batwing Space Shot, opened around the same time of big screen releases from those respective franchises, but without any specific links to them. Justice League Alien Invasion 3D and Green Lantern, both quite explicitly based on DC's new comic line, rather than any movie. Arkham Asylum Shock Therapy, based on the video game series, and Doomsday Destroyer and DC Rivals Hypercoaster, again, both taking cues from the comics rather than any movies. This means that the Spooky Coaster is not only the last active ride to not be based on a live-action franchise, it's the last active ride to not be based on DC Comics. As stated, this coincides with a decade and a half of complete superhero dominance at the box office, and a subsequent permeation into wider popular culture. But thinking about the franchises and the variety of genres represented in the park's first decade, that's what you'd expect from a park called Movie World. And this is a recurring criticism from fans of the park who wish to see a return to the origins as Hollywood on the Gold Coast. The behind-the-scenes focus offered by the flagship Movie Magic Studio Tour has never been prioritised since the attraction's closure in 2005. And outside of the annual Hooray for Hollywood parade, the park's commitment to old Hollywood remains mixed. Marilyn's there every day, and little girls line up for a picture even though I'm sure most of them haven't seen Some Like It Hot. And that's got to prove something, right? I've been trying to understand these changes as reactions to market trends. Put in another superhero ride because superheroes are in. Get rid of the cowboys because westerns are out. Make the next hypercoaster an Uber coaster, because then we'll get even more schoolies kids through the gate each summer. But as young Einstein said, every action has a positive and negative reaction. Focusing on one type of attraction is ultimately to the detriment of fans of a different type. Village is surely nearing the point of diminishing returns when it comes to smashing together thrill rides with DC comic branding. The next big attraction at Movie World needs to be something more family-orientated. Maybe even something that recaptures that early dedication to the world of classic cinema, with zero superheroes in sight. But unfortunately, given Movie World's observable trajectory, I just don't see that happening. Now, excuse me while I take a huge gulp of water. In 2022, Village announced their plan for a brand new precinct based entirely around 1939's The Wizard of Oz. Set to be built on the former site of Arkham Asylum Shock Therapy and opening in 2024, the precinct will feature 2 family-friendly roller coasters, the first Oz-themed coasters in the world, and, quote, thematic elements including projection mapping, stunning sculptures, and facades as you travel along the yellow brick road. Construction is, at time of writing, still in its early stages, but if the artist's rendition is anything to go by, the Emerald City, Dorothy's Farmhouse, and the Wicked Witch's Castle will all be represented within the precinct. When I heard this news, I was delighted and confused. Delighted because it addressed everything I thought was lacking at the park, but confused because, well, why The Wizard of Oz? Children of the streaming generation aren't going to see that movie on television 100 times before they're 10 like people of my age might have. So unless their parents have actively shown them that movie, it's likely they won't be aware of it. On the other hand, though, who cares? Dorothy is a regular at the park, often performing that song about the rainbows and the place over it, and she has been joined in the recent past by her dear friends the Strawman, Furry, and Metropolis in Movie World's Hooray for Hollywood event. Like with Marilyn, kids seem to like them. You know, and this is just me thinking aloud, it's possible that 6-year-olds don't go into a theme park to critically analyse the cultural relevance of the characters and theming. They just like fun and pretty things. And for what it's worth, I know one happy little boy that will be making a trip up to Queensland in 2020. I'm the little boy.
And that's all I can say about Warner Brothers Movie World on the Gold Coast. Is it perfect? No. Has it had its misses as well as its hits? Of course it has. But for my money, it is still the most consistent and the best themed amusement park there.
Bend the rules up to the point of breaking.
see a chance, you'll take it and you'll win. But I saw the news, you caused another accident. I don't know how this keeps on happening, but it does. But you can't keep living your life like you're the only one that matters. Think about what it does to your friends. Scratching out the words in the rule book until you leave it lying in tatters. Funny face, I know how the episode ends. A rainy afternoon, another painting vandalized. A church fate you left scandalized, but you're fine. The stunt you pulled on the roof, it could have ended tragically. You float through life so magically until you don't. But you can't keep living your life like you're the only one that matters. Think about what it does to your friends. Scratching out the words in the rule book until you leave it lying in tatters. Funny face, I know how the episode ends. But you can't keep living your life like you're the only one that matters. Think about what it does to your friends. Scratching out the words in the rule book until you leave it lying in tatters. Funny face, I know. You never stick around after the credits roll. Funny face, I know how the episode ends.
I think his words, he said he's gonna go to asylum.
I need my bloody wallet.
Oh shit.